discussing how the UW is anticipating the state's future needs and growing the innovators and leaders of tomorrow. And we're pleased to welcome the following panelists. Beverly Copper, Provost at UW-Whitewater. Mitchell Feen is student at UW-Whitewater. Mike Lovell, Chancellor of UW-Milwaukee. Ryan Hickey is student at UW-Milwaukee. Have you met the Chancellor? And Aaron Brower, Interim Chancellor of UW Colleges and UW Extensions.
And Mark. Don't forget Mark.
Where did I miss? He's on the next page. Mark Lang, Executive Director of Entrepreneurship and Economic Development at UW Extension. After the presenters speak, I will turn things over to Regent Tim Higgins to facilitate some additional discussion and a wrap-up. Who is starting? Okay, thank you.
Well, thank you, President Falvo and the board, for allowing us to share some of our experiences with you. When we look at this area, UW-Whitewater has created an entrepreneurial ecosystem, and it's firmly rooted on our campus, but it has grown far beyond our borders and into the city, the region, the state, and it touches across the globe. We're keeping Wisconsin competitive through business incubation, grants, applied learning experiences for students, and by responding to industry needs. And these activities keep academic programs and initiatives relevant to employers, the community, and students. Now, there are also some intangibles that are critical and principles that have helped us cultivate our ecosystem. And they are: be nimble. When an opportunity or challenge presents itself, we act proactively. We embrace innovation, change, risk, and when it comes to working with entrepreneurs, we embrace the joy of herding cats. That was a joke. In many ways, creating the ecosystem meant rethinking what entrepreneurship looked like and who participated. While a competitive spirit and dedication to serve drives us to innovate, we certainly have accomplished a great deal more by working with others. In 2008, UW-Whitewater, the City of Whitewater, and the Community Development Authority recognized the need for a regional business incubator. We envisioned a place where students, faculty, staff, and small business owners could leverage the talents of the university to create new companies. And I have to highlight the leadership of Chancellor Telfer in this regard. That idea went from the drawing board to reality in just 2 years. Today, the Innovation Center at Whitewater University Technology Park is thriving. Our newest tenant is iButton Link. Its CEO chose Whitewater over a location in Illinois because of the collaborative opportunities with the Whitewater Incubation Program. And this program provides coaching, mentoring, and support services to businesses linked to the Innovation Center. UW-Whitewater faculty and staff experts and students assist with growth opportunities, business plans, marketing, and branding. One of those experts is Renee Melton, an associate professor of graphic design. Several of her logos that she created for fledgling enterprises at the Innovation Center have received international recognition. Now, there's an unfortunate misperception held by some that entrepreneurship is only for businesses and business-related fields. At UW-Whitewater, we know that in the sciences, humanities, and arts, they have great ideas too. Take, for example, Professor Dan McGuire, who started a company at the Innovation Center called Foundry Solutions. McGuire and emeritus faculty member Charlie Olson are artists, art professors who have developed ways to create molds using a 3D printer. Their work is highly sought after by industries looking to test new parts and products quickly and inexpensively. The company's 4 U.S. patents and 4 provisional patents are already generating royalties. Shotan Basu, one of our information technology professors, has raised $600,000 for his company. His product, Go Strive, launched 9 months ago, is a revolutionary parks and recreation app for smartphones. He already has 100 clients in 22 states. All of these efforts require flexibility, flexibility in adjusting faculty and staff workloads. At UW-Whitewater, we work diligently to secure funding to help entrepreneurs thrive. One of the more prominent examples is the $5.9 million State of Ingenuity project. The U.S. Economic Development Administration entrusted us with distributing these funds to help regional businesses impacted by floods, auto plant closures, and major job layoffs to diversify, tap into new markets, and transition the economy from an industrial base to a knowledge base. Our outreach centers have provided business consulting for over 3 decades. Faculty and staff experts and UW-Whitewater students help small businesses stay plugged into what's happening in the economy and in the world. We've also partnered with the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation and the Whitewater Community Development Authority to provide $300,000 in early-stage capital to area entrepreneurs. One of our students, who's noted here, Andrew Heft, was the first recipient, winning $10,000. His company, Pinpoint Software, helps Wisconsin grocers stay competitive with its product expiration management services. His newest product, Taskle, went from conceptualization to having paying customers in just 4.5 months. When companies, governments, trade groups, and nonprofits want to show the economic value of their efforts, they call UW-Whitewater's Professor Russ Cashian, who leads our Fiscal and Economic Research Center, also known as FERC. He's pictured here meeting with UW-Whitewater students who work as researchers and analysts. And by the way, I can attest to the fact they meet very early over breakfast. Projects have explored the economic impact of crops, county fairs, clean lakes, university degrees, and many, many more. These reports are giving clients research-based evidence to help grow, alter, or enhance their operations. So we've developed a strong pipeline with companies to place students in internships, undergraduate research opportunities, and certainly jobs across Wisconsin. Now, this intersection may look familiar to many of you. It was a favorite of Steve Jobs and a slide he showed at almost every Apple product launch. Jobs said, "We've always tried to be at the intersection of technology and liberal arts, to be able to get the best of both, to make extremely advanced products from a technology point of view, but also have them be intuitive, easy to use, fun to use, so that they really fit the users. The users don't have to come to them, they come to the users." Like Apple, we have some of the best and brightest on our campuses and in our organizations. To anticipate the needs and grow tomorrow's innovators and leaders, we must attract and keep the best and the brightest. And so, as we've discussed so often, competitive salaries and benefit packages are critical. This intersection also reminds us of the key role that universities play in building technology and innovative economies and providing our students with a strong liberal arts education that prepares them for the 21st century. President Cross has reminded us that we need to listen, not lecture. At UW-Whitewater, we start by listening to the needs of industry. We hear from our employers that they are looking for employees who have a strong, broad-based education, students who can write and speak well, think critically, who know about other cultures, who can get along with people who are different from them, and who are prepared to handle whatever comes their way. We are integrating these essential learning outcomes through our LEAP work into every division on our campus. We are also focused on the LEAP high-impact practices for student success, such as undergraduate research, now being conducted in all colleges and almost every academic program on our campus. We also listened to industry leaders telling us what they needed from business graduates. And in response, the College of Business and Economics completely redesigned its MBA curriculum in record time. Every college has an advisory board of business, community, and disciplinary leaders, and every college has a dean's council of students giving us valuable input. We listen and we take this feedback very seriously. UW-Whitewater answered the call to make Milwaukee the freshwater capital of the world. We invested time and resources to create an Institute for Water Business located in Milwaukee at the Global Water Center, where all of the campus's water-minded folks can network, generate new ideas, and conduct research. Linda Reed, Associate Professor of Business Law, spearheads many of our efforts. So as you can see, UW-Whitewater's entrepreneurial ecosystem is thriving. By being nimble, thinking differently, and collaborating effectively, we planted the seeds for strong economic growth, and we are helping to build a stronger Whitewater and a stronger Wisconsin. We've accomplished this because of driven faculty, staff, and students willing to embrace these very principles. And I am delighted to have one of those individuals here today with us. Mitchell Feeney is an entrepreneurship major at UW-Whitewater. I'd like to point out that he's only a sophomore and already has established a business with an international presence. I will let you have him tell you all about it.
Thank you. I'm going to set up for 1 second. So, as Provost Cooper said, I am Mitch Feeney. I'm a sophomore at UW-Whitewater, and I'm studying entrepreneurship. I'd like to first share a little bit of my past and some passions growing up and where I come from. I am co-founder of DMZ Aerial now, and that's a company that provides technology to the agricultural sector, and this is one of our pieces of technology. So when I grew up, I was about 8 when I started riding around in the truck with my dad. And my dad's a business manager for Winfield, which is a division of Land O'Lakes. And he spends his days walking farmers' fields, looking for nutrient deficiencies, insect pressure, and disease, and trying to solve those problems and grow yields and eventually, hopefully, feed the world. So I learned a lot about what I had to look for in a field to solve these different issues or these problem areas. And then in high school, I applied to be an intern for Winfield and to continue to try and be just like my dad. So that internship taught me a lot more about what to look for, what insects are beneficial and what insects are not so beneficial, what to look for to find a nutrient deficiency in corn and soybeans. And what we found was, my cousin was also an intern, Zach Feeney, he's the other co-founder, is that crop scouting, which is this activity that we were taking part in, was extremely inefficient. We could walk maybe 20 to 30 acres in an hour. And to give you an idea, the average farm size in Wisconsin is over 200 acres. So we spent most of our days walking on 1 or 2 farms. So since then, we've developed AIM-Q, which is Aerial Intelligence Modified Quadcopter, and also a new scouting practice that we call the 3D analysis system, which is starts with discovery, diagnosis, and documentation. And we use the images that we can capture from AIM-Q, and we might be able to pass it around, but there's a camera on board on this system that takes high-definition imagery. Otherwise, I'd fly it, but the FAA might have some issues with that. So after taking images, we'll send them to an agronomist, and the agronomist can then actually diagnose the area, send an actual recommendation to the farmer, rather than it coming from an intern who may or may not know what they're doing in the field. So when we were drowning in a sea of green, walking across thousands of acres, we needed to come up with a solution. Since then, our AIM-Q systems are flying across 15 states as well as Canada. We have 2 distributors that distribute the product, and that is growing. My cousin's traveling, giving presentations. I am at Whitewater. and doing studies to learn the basics of how to generate business. He's a little older than I am. He graduated from UW La Crosse. And since that point, and because of our success, I guess I can go back to explaining why Whitewater, why has that helped us develop our business. And I'd say 3 things helped me specifically with DMZ Aerial's growth. It was the student involvement on campus and collaborating with other students. It was being able to use campus resources like the Innovation Center. And third, it's faculty being accessible to students. So that first point was students and involvement. I joined CEO, which is a student organization on our campus, and it's a student organization on many of our campuses. And they put me in a couple of the competitions, the National Elevator Pitch Competition, which you had 90 seconds to try and convince an investor to invest in your business. I was able to make it to nationals in that, and then followed up by applying to the Governor's Business Plan competition. And we were able to make it to second, didn't quite get first in our category of technology, and was able to get some cash for the prize, as well as some accounting services and grant writing services. But most importantly, the Wisconsin State Journal wrote a really nice article, and it's amazing what PR can do, and Whitewater's really knows that really well, knows PR well. As we can see, they do a pretty good job taking good pictures. Although I'm not a big fan of myself being in pictures, I think this one I'm proud of. That's me flying our AIM-Q 1.0, which allowed us to scout about 200 acres per hour. This is since then the AIM-Q 2.0, and the AIM-Q 2.0 can let us scout over 400 acres per hour. So that 20 to 30 acres per hour that we were able to walk has exceeded about 89% efficiency increases. And this, our customers now for this, again, across 15 states, are USDA's top 100 independent retailers and cooperatives that provide crop services to their customers, their farmers, as well as some of the best farmers, crop consultants, and agronomists in the Midwest region. This is a picture of a tablet. Most of these systems are controlled by a tablet, so application development is also important. And Ghost Drive is another app that has gone really far on the UW Whitewater campus. So again, student organizations allowed me to compete in these competitions and allowed our businesses to get to this point. The next point would be the faculty involvement. I can call Showtime Basu or Dr. Dugan at 8 or 9 p.m. at night and ask them for recommendations on our business. And that does not happen on most campuses. And we wish it could be. We can't ask all professors to be available for students at that type of accessibility, but it would be amazing if a student can go and meet with a professor at any time to ask for recommendations on a business, because business doesn't really sleep. We have to be awake at midnight sometimes when we get a call from one of our manufacturing plants that says we're going to have a delay on the AIM-Q2 system. And a lot of the electronics are overseas being manufactured, so it's not like they're on the same sleep schedule as we are. Additionally, the campus resources like the Innovation Center have helped us immensely. Being able to meet with a customer at a place like the Innovation Center makes us look so much better. Rather than meeting in Prairie du Sac at our little tin shed with a remodeled interior, we can meet at a really nice facility in a nice conference room and impress our clients. And with that, I'd like to introduce Chancellor Lovell to talk about his ventures. Thank you.
Good luck, Mike.
Well, it's always tough to follow students who bring really cool toys to the presentation. So I guess I won't be so interesting, but I will say, I looked at the title that was brought up for the panel about anticipating future needs, and I think we heard what Tom Watson said earlier. I'm not sure the university can anticipate the future needs, but I think we can work in collaboration with industry to understand the needs and address them. And so I'm not going to be so presumptuous to think that I know what industry needs going forward, but I think I can work with them to help them be successful. So what I'm going to talk about before I get into my slides is the state has identified clusters, areas of focus where they believe we can be nationally competitive. And I think it's one of the key things for the university system to be part of is helping those clusters be nationally competitive and make centers of excellence here within the state. And the universities can do that in 3 ways. We can help with the workforce development, the talent pipeline. We can work on technology development. We can help these companies be more globally competitive by the products and services that they provide. But we can also, almost more importantly, we can be conveners. We can be the synergistic organizations that bring these clusters together on a common ground, when many times they could be in some competitive spaces, but the university provides a common space for them where they can meet and talk about some of their needs to help the whole sector move forward. So because I only have about 7 minutes to talk, I can only really go into one cluster in any detail of ways that we're trying to address these clusters. I'm going to start with energy powers and controls. Obviously, we had Johnson Controls here earlier. Ryan is in the middle of this, who you're going to meet in a second, Ryan Hickey. I thought this would be a good one for me to focus on. And if you think about the EPC sector in the state, there's over 900 companies. It's huge. Over 100,000 employees work in the sector with $38 billion in revenue each year. So when I think about what the state has been built on, Wisconsin is already a global leader and competitive. And it's really, when you think about the state, where we came from and where our economy is developed from, it's really a foundational sector, what we built. And at the bottom of the slide, you see some of the giants who are globally competitive that already exist in the state that we, as a university system, need to provide, I said before, the talent, we need to provide the technology to help them be more competitive. So, think about what's going on in energy right now. I think that we all should recognize that there is a huge historic opportunity out there for our state. Global power and energy, as we know, as the rest of the world develops and the standard of living goes up, over the next 5 years, it's going to be a $1.9 trillion growth. And certainly, you think about those companies I just showed, think about what opportunity that provides them to be more successful with this major growth going on. And take a look, it's really in all types of energy. It's not just some of the fossils natural, but a lot of alternative energies as well. So a study last year by the Political Economy Research Institute showed that based on this growth, Wisconsin should be able to get about $2.8 billion in clean energy investments into the state and create about 35,000 new jobs. And currently, just for context, we rank about in the middle right now for getting money into the state for developing new energy technology. But we have a really significant challenge, and I think we all need to understand, I think we saw some of the workforce numbers in the presentation this morning, that the average age of the workforce in the energy industry is 46.6 years old. And over the next decade, 62% of the energy workforce may retire. And so what role, then, you think about what the university can play? First of all, we heard about how technology can reduce the number of workers needed in a certain area. In terms of the manufacturing, but think about the talent that we need to develop, particularly to take care of the opportunity that's in front of us for the companies which I showed earlier. So one of the things that we're doing is really focusing 2 different ways we believe that we can really help Wisconsin be successful in the EPC field. And one of the things I talked about, we can be the convener, and we have I was co-founder with a gentleman named Alan Perlstein of the Midwest Energy Research Consortium. This consortium started out actually as a university effort, and then we brought in industry partners, and it has grown over the last 3 years from about 7 organizations to over 70 from 8 states. And the reason why this is important is, I'll show you in a second, is it provides a platform for all the companies in the universities to be in the room together to talk about what the issues and how we can move the entire state forward. We also, I'm going to talk in more detail about our partnership with Johnson Controls, how it really is a new model for university industry engagement that I think is going to be the way the country is going to go in the future. So what the goal is, the Midwest Energy Research Consortium, is really to make Wisconsin a national leader in energy powers and controls. We already are right at the precipice. We're going to make sure going forward we stay ahead of the rest of the country. So the things we talk about when we get together, we talk about workforce development. We want to know from the entire cluster what your needs are and how we can align our curriculum and our graduates with the skills they need to be successful. Technology innovation. We run research programs where companies put out the consortium puts out an RFP where the faculty from the state can go bid to try to solve the technology problems facing the companies. We look at market strategies, how we can work together to address new markets and help these companies grow. Understanding public policy, what's happening nationally, what are the trends happening. How can we use expertise at the universities to help understand policy decisions. And finally, strategic collaboration. One of the things we can do by collaborating together is there's a lot of federal money out there. We took a DOE and DARPA. How can we go after some of these major grants? We've all seen the manufacturing grants, $120 million going different parts of the country. We need to be part of that equation as well. And finally, I'm going to get into kind of the new model of the way we're working with specific industries. And starting with the model, which I'm going to talk about Johnson Controls, we're doing this in several different sectors and with several different companies. And I always talk about when you work with industry at a university, you heard that if you heard from the panel just before, it can be challenging. And I always describe the speed at which you work really works at the speed of trust. The more you can trust each other, the faster and more you can accomplish. And so I've always found when you're working with industry, the easiest way to start working with a company or an organization is you start talking about joint curricular development to address specific skills gaps or specific skills that the companies need. And so what you do is you get together with the corporation or for the cluster, you determine what's lacking, you develop a curriculum with them, and you just don't develop together, but you teach it together. You have those organizations come in and teach with you. And that starts to develop the trust. Then you start turning some of the undergraduate students' attention towards what the needs of companies are. You start doing undergraduate student projects. You set up vendors. We have classical product realization where companies give us a set of criteria, and we have students from the sciences and the arts and business work together to solve specific needs the companies want. And then as time goes on, then you start having your faculty members working with the corporations on developing joint research proposals between the two organizations or from the organizations you're working on. And that dialogue just then immediately begins to deepen, and to the point where when you start having faculty members working with corporations on developing their technology roadmaps. So with Johnson Controls, when they developed their 10-year technology roadmap, we had 5 of our faculty members in the meetings with them so that the university was plugged in with the future of where the company was going. The expertise was just looked at another arm of their R&D facilities. And finally, I think the magic happens when you can find ways to co-locate together. It's really fantastic. We've heard about the Johnson Controls model, which we'll talk in a second. When you have scientists from around the world working for Johnson Controls, working side by side with our faculty and students, people like Ryan, an experience that provides our faculty and staff, but also provides the company as well. So when you think about the Johnson Controls, we heard Tom speak earlier. And I'm going to be talking about some of the benefits that we see that they get from working with us. And the first thing, we are creating a talent pipeline of their future employees. Ryan is one of about 27 students we currently have working in the lab. Every student that has worked in the Johnson Controls partnership that has graduated has been hired by Johnson Controls. And if they didn't want to work for Johnson Controls, their skill set would be so unique that they could work for any energy storage company in the country. Another thing which Tom didn't point out is we have 16 world-class scientists working. When they come to work, they come to our engineering building where their labs and offices are. They have adjunct appointments. They're teaching and mentoring our students. But these individuals, these 16 individuals, only one is from the U.S. 15 of them are from countries like Israel, China, Korea, Canada, Japan, that have come to Milwaukee because they are on a college campus and have this adjunct appointment, something unique that other companies can't offer them. So we've helped attract really a huge brain talent to Milwaukee that otherwise wouldn't be available. And finally, one of the things that, as Tom pointed out, each year Johnson Controls puts out an RFP for their 10 greatest technical challenges, and our faculty and students are competing for those in research proposals. So essentially, the talents of the faculty and students are being turned towards solving the problems of Johnson Controls to help them be successful. Now, the benefits to us, for those of you who have toured our facilities, our dry room, which was mentioned, is the largest dry room in the Western Hemisphere, which is a battery prototyping testing facility. We could have never have built this facility on our own or with the state. Not a state dollar went into that project. And it's not just the biggest, it's the best, because the national labs come and want to use it with us. Our students, certainly, they're taking courses in the energy engineering curriculum that, that have faculty from Johnson Controls teaching them. We talked about the 27 internship opportunities, and they get the extra added benefit of the practical knowledge of the industry mentors. So they're just learning from the faculty of the university. They're getting that in-depth experience from that. We talked about the hands-on learning that is so important to helping them be successful once they graduate. Our faculty, not only do they have facilities that make them nationally competitive, we've had numerous federal grants from the National Science Center because we have these unique facilities, but they also now have partners in Johnson Controls, the scientists, that are helping them be more successful. And finally, I mentioned before, Johnson Controls puts about $1 million a year out in an RFP for us to compete to help solve their technical challenges. And finally, what's the benefits for this partnership from the states? We are becoming renowned nationally. If you may have seen, the DOE Energy Storage Hub was awarded. Johnson Controls, along with our national lab and subsequently us through subcontracting, were a significant part of that Energy Storage Hub being awarded. Last year, we won the Edison Award for innovation, which is we won the gold medal in the energy field, which is really an Oscar of innovation that is given out each year. And over the last year, our faculty and JCI scientists have written joint DOE proposals that were awarded at a rate of, we've gotten $35 million in federal funds with a 92% success rate. Anybody who's in academic science knows that 90% is unheard of. I could speak around the country about the partnership because that success rate is so high. And then finally, I think we've shown that we are attracting new companies and talent, into the region, to the state through these activities. So. Without further ado, I want to turn things over to Ryan, who's going to talk to you about his experience. And I would just say a couple of things about Ryan. Ryan he's from Northern Illinois, and he was accepted to about 10 schools, including Duke and some other pretty high-profile schools. But he came to UWM because he recognized the value of the partnership and what it may offer him if he came looking for his future in his career. And he may not talk about it today, but he's also a budding entrepreneur. He's got his own online business that is doing quite well, and I'm not sure how much time you put into that with all the other things you have going on, because he's really a talented individual. So Ryan?
I have slides. So my name is Ryan Hickey. I'm currently in my third year at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. I'm studying mechanical engineering, and I've had a very unique opportunity, especially today, to talk about my experience at UWM and the impact that it's had on me. So for going back to high school, my college decision, as Chancellor Lovell said, I was picking between a bunch of Big Ten schools: Duke, Michigan State, Michigan, Madison even, U of I. And when I was looking at all the schools, I was weighing, what am I going to do after I graduate? I can get a really good accredited school, have a good GPA, get an internship or two, but how does that set me apart from everyone else? And when I came across UWM, something I saw that no other university was offering was this ability to work in the engineering building with the world's leaders, scientists, get work experience, real-world industry experience, not just research with an advisor. It's something that no other university could really offer something that compared to that. So I kind of just jumped right to it and went to the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, and I can't look back now. I couldn't imagine going anywhere else. So once I came here, I actually started a formal internship with Johnson Controls. Those are some pictures of me that I did. I'm on the front page of the UWM directory this year, which was kind of a shock. It's definitely weird walking around the union and seeing my face plastered. But this is a picture of the 8th floor synthesis lab. I'm in the glove box making coin cells. If I went downstairs to the 1st floor, we go in the dry room, which is where I spend the majority of my time working on advanced pouch cells that really no other facility in the world has, because we have the ability to change between energy, power cells, and then just normal lithium-ion cells, which one dry room for 3 different cell designs is something that was unheard of. So when I eventually got this work experience with these scientists, it's something that I put on my resume, and now companies are reaching out to me for seeing if I'm willing to leave them for the summer to do another internship with them. And that brings me to my opportunities gained from UWM. So last summer I had the opportunity to travel across the country and live in Los Angeles, which was a lot nicer weather than it is right now. But they recruited me because they're the technical expertise for all space industries. They don't sell anything. All they do is basically charge for their opinion on how science works, basically. And they didn't have a huge pouch cell company or division in the company, so I came in with a lot of knowledge of just basically cell design, manufacturing, and knowing how the pouch cells function. And they actually had a project that was doing missiles, anti-missiles, so they needed a battery system for it. And I was doing testing to see, you know, how far can we really push these batteries before it'd be bad to have them on an airliner where they destruct. So I got to spend several weeks just out in the parking lot, basically destroying cells, and it was a lot of fun. Got a lot of science from it. I also did on the right synthesis of silver nanowires for solar cell applications. I basically was designing new materials to make the welding better and better efficiency in space. So all the work that I did this summer was all directly related back to what I did at UWM. If I didn't go to UWM and get the experience that I did with Johnson Controls, I would have no chance of getting this internship now. That experience that I gained, I was able to actually get my first publication through this company, and now, because of that, I'm going to future opportunities for this summer. I've been reached out to by Argonne National Lab, JPL, QuantumScape, which is a startup from Stanford. If any of you guys know research, they apparently came up with an energy density which is like tenfold of current standards. I'm getting reached out to them, so you know, the opportunities are endless. UWM has given me that choice of where I want to go. Instead of just staying in Milwaukee, I'm able to travel around the country, and then even this the DAAD program, the RISE, in Germany, I could be spending my summer traveling Europe, which is all linked back to UWM. 3 years ago, I couldn't dream of spending my summer in California, let alone Europe, and getting paid to do it. So it's something that I just really, it's changed my life forever, and I can't say enough good things about it. Short and sweet.
Thank you, Ryan, and Mitchell. I think you made a sale. Thanks also for the opportunity to talk with you. I don't have a PowerPoint. I made a handout that's in your packet, which tries to summarize some basic points related to future of higher education. Many of you know me as the Flex guy, but what I'm actually here for today is to not talk too much about Flex, or actually just a tiny bit, but more talk about the almost 3 decades of scholarship that I've done on educational innovation and student success and student learning outcomes. So, you know, I want to talk about this question that really has been raised through the whole day, which is assuming higher education is as important as we're seeing it is, what should it really look like? What kind of content, what kind of delivery methods, and what kind of educational activities should really be at the center of it? What I want to say first as a frame is we are in this significant transition time in higher ed. We know this. Part of it is driven by economics. On the back of this one-pager is a quick trend line looking at state funding in public higher education. The point of that trend line really in some ways is this trend line has been consistent since a peak of funding in the late 70s, early 80s, regardless of what political party is in power, and also regardless of the economic health of the nation. So during the 90s, still was a decrease in funding, and through the last 5, 6, 7 years. So this is in my view, non-political issue. It's just a reality of trying to rebalance the role of public and private funds that finance education. This is coming at a time, though, where the demands on higher education couldn't be higher. So now there are upwards of 18, 19 million people entering higher education. 70% of those with a high school degree or equivalent are entering higher education. And the biggest growth in the population of who's entering higher education are what we call non-traditional students. And you remember last year, Molly Broad talked about the growth in non-traditional students. In fact, 85% of those seeking higher ed are non-traditional, not four-year, not full-time, not residential. And then finally, as another driver in this transition is technology, which is changing everything. And in the context of higher ed, what it's really doing is changing a focus from access to information to application of information. So we are all literally swimming in information, and the premium now is, what do you do with it? How do you figure out what's good from bad? How do you take it and apply it in new settings? How do you work together? How do you generate new information, research and scholarship, et cetera? So there's several components then of what higher education can and should look like, and particularly, I think, in the UW system. First of all, we need to be accessible to these new populations. Bev talked about technologies, users not having to come to technology, but the technology comes to them. In some sense, if you think of education as our technology, we are forcing this non-traditional students to come to us in very structured ways, semester by semester, et cetera. And so, in a sense, how do we develop curricular structures that are flexible to the students who are the fastest, the biggest, actually, proportion of students who are seeking higher ed? Flex is, of course, one example of that. But there are lots of other kinds of examples as well. Self-paced programs that look very much like standard courses, online too. But there are lots of different ways of thinking about flexible modes of delivery that better match the population coming in. Second, and we heard lots of examples of this, education should be focused around projects, project-based learning. People are talking about this now and calling it cornerstone to capstone. So projects right in the first year that students get involved in right away, and they learn math or they learn writing through the context of a project, either undergraduate research or cooperative co-ops out in the community, or coordinated curriculums, et cetera. Again, lots of good examples of this from freshman year all the way up to senior year. Oshkosh's new Gen Ed curriculum is structured around projects. College's BAAS is structured around a capstone, applied capstone experience, et cetera. Technology needs to be used in smart ways. And I think of this as blended learning, but what I think about there is, again, with the information we have, pushing off as much as possible to outside of the class to really highlight what's precious about the face-to-face interaction. That's such a precious activity that it's almost criminal not to use it for some kind of engagement and any kind of, therefore, lecturing that it just doesn't make sense given the kind of technologies that we have. Flipped classrooms, MOOCs, again, Flex is another option of that. And then the last thing I want to say is, I think into the future, as a system, President Cross has talked about the need to think about the systemness of what we do. We need to build in more collaborative degrees. We have some good examples of this. We have BSN at home through 5 institutions around the state. We have a bachelor's in sustainable management, Parkside, River Falls, Stout, and Superior, a master's in sustainable management, Green Bay, Oshkosh, Parkside, Stout, Superior, health and bachelor's in health information management, Green Bay, Parkside, Stevens Point, La Crosse. We're hoping to develop a kind of stackable certificate, bachelor's of business administration through Flex. But in this world in which we each have strengths as system institutions, why not leverage those strengths together through collaborative degrees? So here's actually my final point. There are lots of examples of us doing this, but we don't do it in a very coordinated way. So that's one. We don't think very strategically about how should we develop collaborative degrees, what degrees. If we're going to encourage blended learning and use of technology, how are we doing this system-wide so that we're having the biggest bang for the buck? And second, as a Board of Regents, how are you incentivizing institutions to do this? In what ways can you provide easy access to processes that allow collaboration in different ways, easy access to use of funds so that revenue generated gets used in the ways that you want to use it, et cetera. So it's a sort of intentionality and coordination and incentivization that we really need to push forward. With that, I'll turn it over to Mark Lang, Director of Entrepreneurship and Economic Development in Extension.
Wrapping it up, you're holding up very well. I appreciate this opportunity to be with you, and I really believe that the issues that you're reviewing today are critical to the university system and to the state. So the Division of Entrepreneurship and Economic Development is actually a collection of numerous organizations and initiatives inside Extension, and I think they share two common goals. One is to increase the success rate of Wisconsin's new companies, and two, improve the performance of Wisconsin's existing companies. Now, those two goals are pretty important to me, but I think they're important to the headline you see on the slide that's in front of you. This morning, I had the opportunity to check in, and I watched Dennis Winters do his presentation for you on the economy, and I have to tell you, I was so struck by how complex the economy is, just all those factors mixing around. And I can tell you, you're not going to get that from me because I'm a pretty simple guy. I'm focusing the work that we do at Extension and my presentation to you today on a much narrower approach to the economy. And it has to do with inside the businesses and what's going on inside those businesses and how important that is to our ability to affect the economy. So now, the other thing, the best thing I've heard most economists do when they end presentations like Dennis this morning, I've heard this one time. At the end, he said, I have to tell you that about 38% of all statistics are made up. So I start my presentation to telling you that probably 38% of statistics are made up. That's actually a joke. You can take that however direction you want. So I'm going to talk first about this shift in our economy. And so what you're looking at here are three, I think about the last decade or 10 to 12 years, the amount of headlines that you've been bombarded with having to do with, starting with 9/11 and the banking crisis and the housing meltdown, war and budget deficits and election cycles. While we're paying attention to all of that over the last 10 to 12 years, what's been happening in the economy quietly has been shifting very dramatically, and I show you these three charts together so you can see that these aren't just individual blips, that there is definitely a trend. The green line, arrow that I have pointing there, is the year 2000. And on the upper left-hand corner is the average employment size of our public companies, our largest companies, both in terms of the total number of people in those companies and the average size of those companies. And look what's happened to those since 2000. The same thing with our smallest companies, the average size of a standalone startups and how many employees are there. And I'm going to give you some numbers on those in a minute. And then when you take all of our business establishments, which is, again, where I live and how I view the economy, and you divide that by the total number of jobs, you see that the average number of jobs per business establishment is going down. So what we're seeing here is not just some temporary adjustment to business cycles. Because what happened before this, the many, many years that happened before this, is a very stable and slowly expanding economy in all of these. But in 2000, it all changed. And then there's probably some positive things that changed that, productivity, technology, offshore manufacturing, a lot of different things that might have had an impact on that, but then all those other things that I mentioned. So let's take a look just really quickly at some numbers inside of those so that you can understand. And this is on the U.S., but I am going to get to Wisconsin in the next slide. So the average number of jobs per business establishment in 2000 was 11.9, and in 2010 is 7.4. The average number of employees per public company was around 4,900 in 2010, and is down to 3,200 in 2010. And yet here we have this thing with our startups. Look at the startups. The number of startups in 2000, 870,000, and in 2010, 2.2 million. And I'm guessing that in 2012 and 2013, it's probably much larger than that. And yet, look at the size of those establishments. In 2010, the number of employees on average in our startups was 4.7, and now it's 2.0. Here's the big part. Look at the number of establishments. The number of active establishments in 2000 was 11.3 million. And in 2010, that's almost doubled up to 19.7 million. So what do I take from this? There's a dramatic decrease in the number of employees. We're kind of moving from a large company economy to a smaller company economy. And we're really good at launching establishments, but we haven't kept up with the ability to grow those establishments. And I think that's where the opportunity is for the state of Wisconsin and for the university. So let's take a look at Wisconsin. One of the tools that I use in the trade that I described to you is this kind of microeconomic view of the world in terms of what happens inside of companies. It's a database that I use called the National Establishment Time Series. And from that database, several years ago, I helped to create a website called youreconomy.org. And youreconomy.org is a tool. It's a free website. You can go to it online at any time. Allows you to watch business activity across time. And it follows DUNS numbers. All right? So it follows what DUNS numbers report each year. So it's not from the census, it's not from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. It's numbers reported by the businesses. What's interesting is there's a 16-year time period in there. So I took the first 8 years of that time period. And that's what you see on the left side of the screen up here. The thing that this website does is it divides the economy by the size of companies. So we created 5 categories for sizes of companies. Self-employment, which you think is kind of that sleepy little self-employed lifestyle. There's a lot of independent contractors in that group, and a lot of the economy is shifting into that category. Self-employed, 1 employee. Stage 1, 2 to 9 employees. Stage 2, 10 to 99 employees. Stage 3, 100 to 499 employees. And stage 4, anything over 500. Now, according to the SBA, everything under 500 is a small business. And I don't happen to look at it that way. I like to dig in a little bit deeper. So this website allows me to kind of almost take a magnifying glass and roll it over the economy and really look at this. So I want you to look at the left side of that screen. Between 1995 and 2003, we grew jobs on total during those 8 years at a total of 11.7%. And the distribution by those orange bars represent the contribution each of those business sizes made to that growth. And I would propose that that's a very healthy, somewhat pyramid type view. There is contribution by all sizes of companies. And in contrast, now just take a look to the right. And to the right, what you see is what's happened the last 8 years. The shift away from the larger companies down to the self-employed in stage 1 and a little bit more in stage 2. So, I think the strategies that we address as an institution and as an educational institution and from an economic development institution are focused on that left side of the equation. And I'm hoping that we can eventually perhaps get back to some version of that, but I don't think it's going to be just like that. I think it's going to be more like the one you see on the right. And as a system of higher ed and as a strategy in economic development, we need to start acting and behaving and thinking about what's going on in that group. So this is a puzzle piece I like to use because it kind of talks about the pieces that we normally apply to how we serve our economy. And the ones that are already connected are ones that we're pretty familiar with and we fund a lot and we support a lot. Small business development, workforce development, business attraction, and I think rightly so, entrepreneurship at the center of that piece. But we're seeing that entrepreneurship and just the creation of establishments alone, that's not getting it done. We have to become as good at growing our companies as we become at launching them. And I think we're missing that piece. And I think there's a role for us in that piece. There needs to be the further development of a growth company sector. And I don't think economies look at those. We don't think about those. We think in these general terms about our economy. So how do you do that? Because I call that kind of the inside out. By the inside out, I mean we're inside companies and we're at the bottom level looking up at the economy rather than at that top level looking at all those influences to the business environment which are critical. Industry sectors, tax policy, incentives, all of those things are critically important, but we probably should be balancing more how we deal with that environment and how we deal with those individual businesses. So here's a little bit more of how we do that. We think we have to be a little bit more precise. When we look at our businesses, we can't just look at them and say, oh yeah, everything under 500 is small business. They need counseling. It doesn't work that way. It's time to identify and support high potential companies inside the economy. And we can have a number of arguments about what that means. I have some strategies about how to identify and what those really are. But that's how we begin to move that. There's a group of companies out there that are too small to be big and too big to be small. They don't qualify for a lot of the incentives. They don't hit our radar screen, and yet they're out there doing a whole bunch of activities. And if we found them and began to serve them differently, we could have a profound impact on the economy. Matter of fact, I would suggest that what we do at the individual company level over time probably has more to do with the economy than all the other things that we could do. It's interacting with individual companies. In fact, new research out of this Institute for Exceptional Growth Companies, which we have recently relocated to the University of Wisconsin Extension, suggests that businesses actually, if engaged properly over time, can learn the pattern of growth. And it isn't how fast they grow in any one year, it's how many times they repeat growth that project and predict their ability to be high-performing companies. So why shouldn't we engage with them on a regular basis and say, how can we teach you, how can we involve you in regular patterns of learning to grow? We just leave it up to the market. And I think we're making a mistake by doing that. And then what we find is we work with companies who are doing that. We interact with those companies, and I've been involved in this across several states now prior to coming here. We find that it's strategic intelligence and sophisticated information put into the hands of those high potential companies that really help them make a difference. It helps them increase their performance. So I think there is a new role for us. I mean, if you look at the ones that are here, and this is not an exhaustive list, all of the key things we've been talking about today, workforce skill development, research development, new business creation, corporate training, continuing ed, and even small business development. But we probably need to begin addressing this idea of growth company development and making information, really high-end, sophisticated information, the new currency of economic development. So I do have two recommendations because I was asked to try to squeeze that in time here. The first one I didn't think about, but it came from someone at Eau Claire who suggested that, well, one thing that they would love to see is that we need to incentivize faculty and train students to engage more directly with these smaller, high-potential companies. And we also then need to build the next generation of business development services for these high-potential companies, focused on delivering strategic information and market information. Thank you.
I'm going to put this far enough away from me so that I don't blow out Greg's ears this time. Would it be all right? Okay, good. Thanks very much, all of you, for taking time to make the presentations. And I want to ask, as a kickoff, the first question. And Bev, I'm going to aim it at you because you're the one who hasn't talked for quite some time. And, of course, there's going to be a bit of a preface, and that has to do with the fact that we do have a READY committee, and we do have a strategic plan for the READY committee, and part of that has to do with focus on campus. And I think one of the things that I'm hearing from both our presentation just earlier and the presentation now is that it's very important for us to align our incentives so that we have people within the institution on the same page as far as the kinds of things that we're talking about here. And I point out a couple of things that we've identified. For instance, rethinking compensation constraints for faculty working consulting with private sector partners, including or enhancing the role of undergraduate research in consideration for advancement, promotion, and tenure. Another couple of examples, providing the scheduling flexibility for short-term appointments that faculty may take to do research and work temporarily with a private sector business, enabling flexible teaching loads to accommodate the time demands for research, and making allowances for sponsored research projects to buy out teaching loads when needed. Those are just some examples of areas where we could align our incentives within the university. And I think we've also talked about aligning our incentives as institutions with our local business communities, too, in the context of maintaining our campus identities, because one of the thing that is a pride of the university system is that we are not a homogeneous system. Our campuses are in communities and meet the needs of those communities. And the second part is that we need to continue, especially at our comprehensive institutions and colleges, the focus on educating undergraduates. So how do we go about aligning those incentives in those two different ways, and what are our biggest challenges in doing so?
Well, I think one of the things that we've talked about, and a theme that has come up, is the whole idea of communication, 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 and really listening and partnering. So part of our mission, certainly, in addition to, it's just woven into our fabric of continuous improvement and sort of a positive restlessness of always wanting to do whatever we do better, a tradition of excellence in all that we do. It's really taking our partnerships and that collaborative spirit very, very seriously, whether it's collaboration with our sister institutions or certainly with businesses. And it's regular meetings. It's sometimes I think we forget about the value of sitting down with our community leaders, our business leaders, our industry leaders, and just talking things through. We meet on a regular basis with our school community business leaders out at the Innovation Center, and that really helps us align all of this together, and we hear what's on their minds, they hear what's on our minds, so there's not that town-gown separation. We're all in this together, and it's a win-win for everybody. So we're listening to what their needs are, we're revising our curriculum, we're providing those applied learning experiences for our students are in their businesses. So it's all about communication and partnership and collaboration and taking that very, very seriously. Being proactive, moving quickly in some instances, and again, doing some things differently. So as much flexibility as we can have in terms of many of the things you talked about related to how we incentivize faculty, staff, and students. How do we reinforce this work? It looks different than what it used to, the faculty workload. And so what you may find on the board is that you will see that there may be faculty and staff whose teaching load looks very different. It's not the same because they're doing this work. They may have an overload because they're getting a stipend for this work. And so that's where, we really need that support.
Thank you. Aaron.
I wanted to follow up on the same point of faculty workloads. One thing that will be coming to you will be a faculty workload report or request for what recommendations you might provide to the legislature. And the challenge there is that, as Bev is mentioning, workloads look really different than they used to. So the standard metrics of workload, time in class or credit hours or a number of student contacts or almost any of those metrics actually don't apply that well anymore. And instead, my suggestion is to think about what are the kinds of activities you want to see, and then working backwards from that, how do you establish the metrics that really get you there? The other piece of, you mentioned incentives. One of the difficult things for, now that I'm thinking so much about UW colleges, one of the challenges is the margin, so to speak, of the budget is so slim, and I'll say this is probably true of every single institution. There isn't a lot of room to try something new without first having to figure out what to give up. And so if there's an innovation fund that could be established, and you are establishing some of those things, that really helps, because then you can make a purposeful decision to not do this, to buy out a course in order to develop a new, whatever the new innovation would be. Without that innovation fund, though, the campuses don't always have that capacity on their own. We're all trying. I mean, we're really all trying, and we're all developing innovation funds of various sorts. But that may be a really good role for a system to augment or flat out create one.
Great. Regent Whitburn.
Wanted to talk for a second about anecdotal versus more sophisticated fact-finding on the listening side that Ray made reference to. I think Paul left years ago. We had on the campus a survey research center, I think, that could go out and ask the public across the state important questions from time to time. This past week, I saw a news report referring to Gallup data, a recent Gallup study, national, pointing out massive disconnect between what we think about in the academic institution and what we think about in the corporate leadership situation. So I went and looked at the Gallup poll. It was done late last year, and again, I heard about it this past week. 96% of college and university chief academic officers felt that they were extremely or somewhat confident in their institution's ability to prepare students for success in the workplace. 96%. Same poll found that just 11% of business leaders countrywide strongly agree that today's college graduates have the skills and competencies their businesses actually need. So we've got this perception gap. And perhaps, Tim, in and around the work of the committee, this is something we might want to dig into a little. Do you have any of you have any reaction?
I was wondering about the other 4% of heads of universities and colleges, why they didn't think they were doing it.
Just for reference, the Regent Whitburn is referring to the 2014 Inside Higher Education Survey of College and University Chief Academic Officers, for those who want to follow along. So, go ahead. Mark, you had something to say? Beth?
Well, as a chief academic officer, let me try to respond to that. I think one of the things we do is to make sure that we don't have this gap, or we close this gap in our experience, is every college has an advisory board that is made up of, again, community leaders, business leaders, industry leaders, disciplinary leaders. And we take their input very, very seriously. And as I mentioned, to the point where our College of Business and Economics totally redesigned their MBA program to make sure that our graduates are prepared. And that was based on the input that was directly received. So I think part of what we do to try to address that's one example. And the other example is that we invite and have industry, community, business leaders on our campus all the time. Not only are we placing students out in internships and we get that feedback, but we have business industry leaders on our campus mentoring, speaking, and are very much involved in our campus life. And so that's one of the ways where we stay very attuned to what the needs are, and then again take that feedback very seriously and do something about it.
I'd like to ask, I'd be interested in hearing from Ryan, and not your experience with Johnson Controls, but your experience in LA. Did you, and this certainly won't be scientific, but what was the biggest hurdle you faced when doing that work?
Well, for me, the biggest hurdle, I guess you have to say, in the classwork before I started doing my internships, I saw relevance to it for my future, but then after my internships, I came back with a much more appreciation for the finer details and things I needed to know. So that my classes now are a lot more important to me, where I see, like, oh, I use that in California. This is something that I need to, like, master and expert, because I'm going to use this in the real world. Whereas some of my friends that haven't done a formal internship, they might just see it as, oh, I'm trying to get this homework done. But I see it more as I need to know this because I'm going to use it again next summer if I get asked on an interview about it.
So in hindsight, when you think about the LA experience, do you feel that after you came, that you weren't prepared for it? And that what you learned there, would you be much more prepared for the next go-around?
I was prepared for it in the sense from Johnson Controls. Johnson Controls was more of my learning curve, where I came in not knowing any experiment research, anything about batteries, and they kind of taught me Battery 101, how things work. And then I went to aerospace and learned from another company's perspective how they run things and how they expect their level of expectations for what I should be able to do and what they're willing to teach me.
Thank you.
Tim?
I'm sorry, one second.
I'd like to just take it slightly a little different direction for a minute, just an idea, and I don't know if this may be the appropriate forum, but just based on Dennis' presentation earlier and the discussion about the education needed and post-secondary and all of that. Sitting as the region representative on the Technical College System Board and hearing for years this almost endless discussion about transferability of credits and competition and so on and so forth, I'm wondering if there's an opportunity here for a little bit more of a focused discussion between the two systems. And that focused discussion could be around STEM education. And not only looking at it from the perspective of transferring students from the technical college system to the university, but why don't we also think about possibly there may be some instances where it may be very appropriate for university students to go to the technical college and gain something there. Because right now, my sense of all of this discussion between the two systems, we're trying to cover almost like the entire waterfront of every conceivable program, and that it might be just too big in trying to tackle and coming up with some process or something that there can be more appreciation that the systems are working. My sense is that still there is a lot of dissatisfaction that the systems aren't working or trying to work together. So could this be an opportunity that says rather than trying to create something that cuts across every conceivable degree program, every conceivable campus, every whatever, we focus the discussion around STEM programs on both levels and see if there's a way that we can really help jointly the state of the economy in Wisconsin. And that was just the thought that occurred to me as I was thinking here, and maybe it could even be Regent-led or at least commissioned, so to speak, that let's not try to fix everything around transferability. Let's focus and see if maybe that might be a good model that could possibly be replicated in other programmatic areas.
I think that's an excellent segue to the next part of our agenda. But before we do that, Regent Farrell had a question. May she be the last question?
I was never turned down.
I don't know how to take that. I guess the one thing that I didn't hear, and I just am curious about it, and I want to make a strong statement in favor of it, is not only interning, but co-opting, the systematic co-opting every other semester. Our second oldest of 5 sons, I don't dare say this out loud, went to Purdue. But we beat him last night. But anyway, and he co-opted, and he's a mechanical engineer, and he thought from his high school science experience, all he wanted to do in his life was work in wind tunnels, testing the drag on rocket fins. Okay, and he finally, at one of his co-op experiences, because they were with McDonnell Douglas Aircraft, he got there, and he thought he had left this earth and was in heaven already because he was in the wind tunnel. By the end of that experience, he discovered he didn't want to make a career in wind tunnels, and he learned, but he also learned a life lesson. And the reason I bring that up, there's so much more. I mean, these two students are examples of it. There's so much more than just the technical. And I'm wondering if any of I'm asking a question. I'm not a lawyer, and I know you don't ask it if you don't know the answer, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Are there any of our universities that have co-op structures within their offerings to students? No hands are going up. Well,
I would just say I know all the universities that have engineering schools have co-ops, for sure.
All the
engineering schools, and then I think Stout has them in other fields as well.
Okay, that's what I needed, because I just wanted to make sure that entered into the mix of this conversation, because I think there is such benefit for that also, and also from a lucrative standpoint of the earning of credit and dollars. Thank you.
Just to reinforce what you're saying, I agree completely with you about the importance of co-ops. And in the way I think about project-based learning, co-ops, internships, some capstone experiences, summer jobs that are related to academic areas, and then also work in labs, research. They're all variations on a theme, right? You're working right in there, doing the work. There's academic connections that are built in. Sometimes they're paid, sometimes they're not, and they're structured differently. But I couldn't agree more. I think that should be at the centerpiece in our curriculum. Students learn what it is they need because they see the value of that.
The application. Yeah. I guess the other thing that I think is related to that is I heard project-based. All of that learning and the value of it. I have had so many conversations lately, including several really good ones last night at dinner, verifying the value of Project Lead the Way, our high school and now middle school-based programming that takes kids out of the theoretical math science into the application, and then they're backed into the subject saying, my gosh, I can do math because I just did it over here without that label. And I think we, and we often, many of the things we're looking at are always reaching back into K-12. And I think we as a board here should think seriously how to not only have a conversation here with our institutions, but how to relate that back to the K-12 level. Because if we don't get them turned on by then, one of the individuals last night said, no, middle school is where you've got to turn them on to get them to this point. And I just feel so strongly that conversation is the one that Regent Vasquez said in terms of with the technical schools, we need the other strong link of communication and listening, but also doing a little talking, President Cross, with the K-12 system for that reason.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Real quick, sorry.
Yes.
Being someone who was in the Project Lead the Way in high school, that's what turned me to mechanical engineering in the first place. I took 3 courses. I was in the implementation of it throughout high school. I was the first year in our district, and it's definitely something that grabbed my interest in engineering, and then in the second and third course, it pushed me towards which discipline I wanted, which coming to school and not having to transfer majors midway and waste classes was a big help for me.
Do me a favor, go back to your school district and be that statement so that they continue to get the community support and their academic support for that program. You're living proof of this success. Good for you.
Thank you all. Given a lot of good information. I was going to...
Was that an eagle that was outside?
I was going to open it up for discussion, but I think I'd like to change things a little bit. And I know Ray has been taking notes, so I think he really is already prepared to do somewhat of a summation. And so I'd like to go with that first and then get input from the Regents or anybody else on what might be some type of direction.
What I'll try to do is, and if you will bear with me, I will try to pull at least 6 or 7 key points out of this and try to translate those into action statements so that we haven't just heard information. What are we going to do about it? Okay? So if you will critique that, I would be most grateful. So as I phrase this, it may not read smoothly. It may be sort of herky-jerky, but I haven't had time to give it more thought. So number one of the things that I want to do very quickly, very soon, and we've been talking about this already, and today was affirmation of that. I want to be on a first-name basis with the top 25 to 50 CEOs in this country, the principal-to-principal conversation in this country, in this state, I'm sorry, the principal-to-principal conversation that I think both Tom and Jeff talked about earlier. What are those issues? Where's your company going strategically? What are your long-term goals? What do we need to do? So that's my action assignment. The second thing is I'm going to ask each chancellor to do something in their community, meeting with CEOs and business leaders in their community, trying to ask the same questions. And we may have some overlaps there. What is it that you need from us? How can we build this relationship, principal to principal? The third point, before I deal with that, I want to go back to Jose's his gap concept. Was it you, Jose, that mentioned Regent Vasquez? I think that's part of the challenge. I read that as well, Regent Whitburn, in terms of what we thought we were doing and what the people were serving. Whoa. If we were in the private sector looking at that kind of information, that would be, if you were trying to evaluate, that would be very shocking. So that part of this strategy is, what are we doing that you would rather we didn't do, or what are you doing that we should be doing, or what are you asking us to do better? Third point, I'm going to ask each provost to explore how basic business principles and business finance kinds of things might be incorporated into non-business major courses. I'm not asking them to do it. I'm asking them to think about it. Explore it with your faculty. Determine, is this appropriate? I think we heard over and over again, and I can actually speak to that as well. I didn't know how to read a financial statement when I graduated from college. I had to get a book and learn, teach myself. And it's not that difficult. We should be, in fact, encouraging that. Fourth point, work with the chancellors and provost, me, and the business officers to identify these barriers and challenges that I heard Jeff and Tom, and I think Mike Lovell mentioned it, the barriers that makes it difficult for entrepreneurs and businesses to interface with the university. That should be just so, it should be like butter on the bottom of a sled. It should be easy, and it's just not. And it's never been that way. How do we work on it? Doesn't mean we'll make it perfect, but let's explore that, try to figure that out. And I don't know who I'm going to work with at this point, but I think probably some of the folks that are currently working on the D2P project, and I know Mike's got something, Mike Lovell has something similar, to evaluate and expand the research to commercialization process. That D2P process, it's called different names in different places. Years ago, it was called tech transfer. And everybody's looking for a new way of doing it. And I heard a couple of things today that piqued my interest in how do we collaboratively develop business proposals around good ideas. That was good stuff. We've got to figure out a way to deal with that. I don't know how to do that. I don't have an answer. I'm going to rely on others to help us think that through. I think we need to do a little bit of curriculum analysis. There were two curriculum ideas or areas that were brought to our attention today that have perhaps, and maybe there were a few more hidden in those comments. One was data mining, and I know we're talking about a collaborative graduate degree in data science, predictive analytics, big data, tremendous opportunities. I heard that mentioned several times today. I know we're working on some of that, but I think this is an area we need to consider more carefully. I also heard advanced materials. And I know some of the things, even back when I was a part of that, they were struggling with those soft materials, those liners inside of your trunk, inside of the car, not just leather components, non-plastic, fabrics. How can we do this in a more sustainable way? And I heard Tom repeat that several times today. And not too long ago, I was approached by someone who said they went elsewhere to do work with advanced composites. And I think we need to take a look at that. Is that an area we need to, doesn't mean we should, just means do we need to explore that? And I'm going to ask the provost and some of our institutional research folks and Heather do some data analysis on that. Is this something we should be in? And finally, I'm already scheduled to meet with the tech colleges, with Morna and Kathy, and I've been meeting with them on a regular basis previously in my old position. But we're going to talk about some new ways that we could partner effectively, but I believe today helps accelerate that a bit and advance the importance of that. And then shortly, I haven't set this up yet, but I've been meeting on a regular basis with DPI and Tony, but I think that process needs to grow more quickly than I had anticipated. So those are 7 things that I pulled out of this. Add to that, correct, or encourage me to look at something else.
Comments, suggestions? Mark?
I think that either overlying or underlying all of this is we really need to also address our faculty compensation crisis. Here are the generals and the officers and the strategists, but you need the troops. And I think as we develop ideas, we're going to need the troops to deliver. And I think we can't lose sight of the fact that we've got a serious problem.
That's one of those fundamentals, isn't it, Regent? Bradley.
Ray, I think it's a wonderful idea, as you mentioned about with Tony and his capacity as state superintendent. The only thing I would recommend that you also keep in mind, at least most definitely in Milwaukee, we've got to accept a reality that's there, and that's the charter schools and some of the more successful choice schools. And that I hope that there's some reach out to those two, because there are some very, very successful charter schools as well as also some very, very successful choice schools. And they're producing some of the brightest, well-educated children, and most definitely children that are coming from poverty and that are children of color. And if we are serious about reaching out to those two populations, I'm not saying that MPS doesn't have them. They do. But I think that when it comes to Milwaukee, we cannot forget that reality. It may not apply anywhere else in the state, but it definitely applies in Milwaukee. So I would just encourage you to think of a way to reach out to, and there are some successful both charter and choice schools that I think the UW system needs to reach out to.
Other comments?
Yes, Jim.
Thank you. I was thinking about what was not discussed, and we really did not spend a lot of time talking about those areas of economic distress. And I know when the Legislative Audit Bureau did audits of what used to be a very fragmented economic development program, very little of the money or attention was given to those areas of economic distress, either some of our small up north communities or our inner cities. So I think that's something that needs some additional attention. On a more positive note, I was struck by someone's comment about the value of positive public relations. And I was struck by the wonderful success stories that we heard today. And I think that the power of the press in that way of advertising what's happening in economic development is just a very good thing and should be encouraged.
Okay. We've covered a lot of ground. We will take a break, and we will reconvene at 2:20. We did have a sale of one drone. There's more if anybody else is interested.
We just raised the price.
Gary's going to find a way to pay for the one he's buying. Okay, we're going to take a little break from the economy and remind ourselves of the outstanding work being done by academic staff across the UW system. This afternoon we are honored to have with us some special guests, the recipients of the 2014 Regent Academic Staff Awards for Excellence. There are more than 14,000 academic staff throughout the UW system, the university's largest sector of employees. Many people will attest that they are the gears that turn the wheels of public higher education. So to lead us in our award presentations, let me turn things over to our favorite non-traditional Regent, Tracy Rybar.
Definitely our favorite.
Do I need to point out I'm the only non-traditional?
No. I think everybody knew this.
Thank you. When something works consistently well, it's easy to take it for granted. You're thirsty, you turn on a faucet. The same might be said for the hard-working UW system academic staff. They work so diligently with such passion, we've become accustomed to their level of commitment to our students and their community. Even so, we are determined not to take their efforts for granted. That's why I stand before you today. I am honored to help recognize individuals and organizations that have made our UW system institutions second to none. The Regents Academic Staff Award for Excellence reminds us how vital today's winners are on our campuses and more generally how important all academic staff are in meeting our educational mission. Chairing this selection committee was both gratifying and challenging because there are so many academic staff doing exemplary work. I greatly appreciate the time and efforts of my fellow members of the selection committee and wish to thank Regent Tim Higgins, Regent Janice Miller, Regent Drew Peterson for their dedication to this effort. Their inputs and insights were invaluable in selecting the most deserving recipients of this honor. That said, I'll turn things over to Regent Higgins to present our first award.
Thank you, Regent Rybar. I am excited to announce that our first winner is Bonnie Isaacson, who is the non-traditional student coordinator at UW Eau Claire. And the reason I'm excited is because I get to return a bit of a favor, because I was on campus at Eau Claire a few months ago, and my first visit that morning was with Bonnie, among others. We're going to talk about veterans. And, you know, I was supposed to meet Pat and Jim in the lobby of Schofield Hall, was it? You know, and being the kind of guy I am, I don't know how I missed them. They were probably standing right inside the front door, but I missed them. And so I stumbled down the hallway and into the room that I'm supposed to be meeting, but, you know, I was going to get introduced first. So I look in the door and I say, "Hi, I'm Tim Higgins." And all of a sudden everybody goes, "Oh, he's here. Oh, my God." He's really weird. But anyway, Bonnie took me by the hand and introduced me to everybody. And so I know very well that not only is she good with clumsy regents, she's very good at helping and advising non-traditional students, because she was one herself. She earned her associate's degree from UW-Barron County, and 14 years later, when she was married with 4 children, she enrolled at UW-Eau Claire to work on her bachelor's degree. And then she later received her master's degree from UW-Stout. Obviously a wandering student, we can see that. But Bonnie understands the needs of non-traditional students, and that's what we're here to celebrate. Her accomplishments are many, but let me note just a few. She developed a separate orientation program to meet the needs of non-traditional students and collaborated with the campus library to create a separate space for them to meet and study. UW Extension awarded several grants which Bonnie used to support veterans and military families studying at UW-Eau Claire. She served on the UW Systems Veterans Committee and created new support organizations, including a group for students with children. But we can't fully appreciate Bonnie's dedication until we hear directly from those she serves, non-traditional students. And here are some direct quotes. Bonnie has made me feel very comfortable in the college atmosphere, especially where being an older student and a single mom can be difficult to fit in. And her calm and positive demeanor allowed me to feel at ease, and our meeting was instrumental in my decision to enroll. When we constantly hear that level of appreciation from students, we know this academic staff member is doing an outstanding job, well deserving of recognition. So please welcome our first Academic Staff Excellent Award winner, Bonnie Isaacson from UW-Eau Claire.
Well, thank you very much, Tim, for that introduction, and thank you to the Regents and for sponsoring the award, and to the committee that selected me. I truly feel very, very honored to receive this award. There's lots of thank yous that go out to people at UW-Eau Claire as well, Chancellor Schmidt and Provost Klein, the cabinet for nominating me, for my boss, Debbie, who has been a strong supporter of me and my program for many years, for the wonderful colleagues and friends that wrote the recommendation letters for me. It all began with those letters. And to my right-hand assistant, Kathy, and for those of you that are familiar with the series MASH, she's my radar. She knows exactly what I need before I even ask for it. I want to thank my husband for being with me today, and he also works at UW-Eau Claire. And for all those rides to work on snowy days when I would have called in, he made sure I got to work safely. So thank you, Michael. I was asked to comment briefly on what it takes to be an outstanding academic staff member. I could talk about my wonderful parents who instilled a strong work ethic in me. They worked hard on the family farm to make sure that we had what we needed. And I'm sure they're looking down today and in their quiet Norwegian way are saying, "Oof, da Bonnie, that's quite an award." I could talk about my journey as a non-traditional student. It was a challenge, but I did it. And doors were open to me that would not have been opened otherwise without my degrees. I could talk about several of the adult students that I've served over the years, how seeds were planted, how those seeds sprouted and grew, and how I've had the extreme pleasure of watching many of those students cross the stage on their commencement day, doors now opening for them. Well, I guess I did just talk about all that, didn't I? My friend and author, Joan Fleming, talks about zestful living in her book, Fuel Stop, and about the 3 Ps, purpose, passion, and perseverance. From my perspective, working with adult students and veteran students, I believe outstanding academic staff members find purpose in their work, a reason to throw back the covers on those cold, snowy mornings, eager to get to work, ready to start the day, ready to plant those seeds. We find passion in our work, loving what we do, knowing that we're making a real difference in many people's lives and sometimes in their whole family's lives. We persevere when budgets get cut and we're asked to do more with less. We find ways to run our programs and support our students, helping them to find their own purpose and passion and persevere to their graduation day. But I would also add to Joan's 3 Ps my own 3 Ms of what it takes to be an outstanding academic staff member. Mission, mentors, and meaning.
Mission, keeping my eye focused on why my Office of Non-Traditional Student Services exists at UW-Eau Claire. It's all about student success. Mentors, learning from those who have helped and guided me along the way. And now I'm paying it forward by mentoring my younger colleagues and other students. I have to throw this in here. It wasn't part of my presentation today, but just before I left home this morning, I checked my email. And there was a message that I wanted to share with you, and it's from Susan Green. She was congratulating me on my award today, and she said, "You won't remember me, but a few years ago I met with you, and it was to discuss my returning to school for my master's degree. You were very kind and encouraging and helped me to make the decision to go back to school for my master's degree. I'm now working at UW South, using my degree, and last year I was the recipient of the Regents Academic Staff Excellence Award. So I feel in some way we keep paying it forward. My third M is meaning, finding joy in my work, serving the adult, veteran, transfer students like Mary, laid off at age 52, shortly before she was ready to retire. She went back to school and earned her degree at age 57, and she's now again gainfully employed. Like Michael, a young single dad who never ventured outside of the Midwest, but he went on a 6-month study abroad program to Japan, and it was a life-changing experience for Michael. Like Sheila, who stepped out of her comfort zone, found all the resources she needed to be successful, became actively involved in several organizations and leadership roles on campus, all while being a single mom. Like Karen, who despite severe health issues is persevering and says, "I won't stop now." Like my niece Emily in the Air Force, stationed in Afghanistan, who proudly stands between 2 big tankers over there holding her sign that says, "I'm a blue gold." She'll return home in May and graduate in December. So whether I think about 3 Ps or 3 Ms, it all comes back to the fact that I love what I do, serving adult students, and I think that's a big part of what it takes to be an outstanding academic staff member. It's looking up at Schofield Hall each morning when I arrive to work and being in awe, even after 24 years, that I work at this wonderful place, and I thank God for the blessing of my job at UW-Eau Claire. And the fact that I received this Regents Award is very humbling, and I thank you very much for that.
Congratulations, Bonnie. That was extremely well said. Our second individual award winner this afternoon is Ron Zimmerman, who directs the Schmeekley Reserve at UW-Stevens Point. I had the opportunity to introduce myself to Ron minutes ago, and he's a very genuine and authentic guy. And I told him we'll make sure we'll deliver the award well because they've already written a very nice piece in the Stevens Point Journal. So this is just a mere formality. In his 35 years as director, Ron has grown the center from a 2-person staff to a large, nationally recognized environmental learning center with 65 staff and student interns. He developed the Reserve Center into a world-class community nature center, making it the largest university-based environmental, interpretation, and education program in the nation. Under his leadership, the center has grown from 157 acres to nearly 280. It currently welcomes over 2,000 visitors a year. Roe co-founded the Environmental Interpretive Program at UW-Stevens Point and created the Interpretive Handbook series that is now used by universities, parks, nature centers, zoos, aquariums, and many other organizations worldwide. He's also the one who established the unique academic environmental interpretation program at UW-Stevens Point's College of Natural Resources. During his tenure, the center has received literally millions of dollars in grants. He created the Wisconsin Conservation Hall of Fame, which includes Aldo Leopold, John Muir, and Charles Van Heist among the environmental giants with roots in Wisconsin. Let's hear from somebody who well knows Ron's work and has been associated with him during the entirety of his career. Christine Thomas is the Dean of the College of Natural Resources at UW-Stevens Point. And I quote, "One of the primary reasons Ron Zimmerman has been so successful is his ability to establish local, state, and national collaborative networks. Ron is one of those unique individuals who inspires a sense of purpose and mission in those works that he collaborates with on a daily basis." Dean Thomas knows that Ron is exactly the caliber of staff who deserves our admiration, and that's why I'm honored to present the second Academic Staff Excellence Award to Ron Zimmerman of UW-Stevens Point.
I would have worn a tie if I knew there were so many in the room. It's been a long time since I've seen this many suits. That's what happens when you work in a natural area, I guess. Well, when I heard that I could say a few words, I thought about all kinds of things I could say. And then yesterday, late afternoon, something happened in my office, and I decided that I would change everything I was going to say because it was kind of moving. The fellow that co-founded a lot of the programs that you just heard about at the College of Natural Resources came into my office. He retired 12 years ago, but he's been working every day since with us. We don't pay him very much, but he helps us bring in a lot of consulting money to keep the place running. And he was composing a letter, and he was in the middle of writing out a check. And I said, "What are you doing, Mike?" And he goes, "Well, you know, I decided it's finally time to give some money back to one of the alma maters." Now, he went to Iowa, and he had connections with the Iowa City Children's Hospital because in 1944 he was one of those people that was caught in that polio epidemic when he was 3.5, 4 years old. His family dropped him off at the Children's Hospital. You can imagine, 3.5, 4 years old, he was all alone, he missed his mother, he was homesick, he was put into a ward with all kinds of big iron bunk beds with older, more raucous, noisy kids that apparently were recovering from polio. Mike was in a little crib on the floor, and he was intimidated, and he was lonesome, and he thought of the doctors and the nurses as the big people that held him down and used a big needle and syringe on him. And you can imagine the state of mind that he was in. But late at night, there was a janitor, as we called him in those days, Claude, an older man, of course, in Mike's mind, 4 at any age. And this older janitor came through very calmly, sweeping the floor, emptying out the trash and so forth, I suppose. But he took the time to comfort Mike and to talk to him and to get him to stop crying. Mike says, "I remember that my crib was wet. I couldn't even find a dry place to sleep." Remember, he's probably been in diapers only a year before. But Claude stopped every night and talked to him and comforted him, something that maybe the nurses and the doctors didn't have time to do. Well, that was 68 years ago. I'd heard the story before, but yesterday just was the time that Mike decided they were building a new wing in the hospital, and he took a significant amount of money of his, and a significant amount for someone who has taught at the university all his life. It was a pretty big check, and he sent it down there, and he didn't offer it in his name. He said, "This should be given in the name of Claude the janitor." Now, I'm sure that in Claude's job description, it didn't include talking to little 3 or 4-year-olds that were homesick and crying in a crib. He took it upon himself to do that. I guess during Vietnam in the Army, we would have said he was operating above his pay grade. He was doing something a little extra there. There's a parallel to other state employees as well. I've seen a lot of people that operate above their pay grade. In fact, it's not even the exception of the rule in a lot of cases. We all want to be trusted. We want to make good money. But really, money is just a compensation. It isn't the reason that you're motivated to do excellent work. We want to be trusted, we want to be respected, and we want to have a little bit of autonomy. I think that most of our workers, it doesn't matter what, whether you're academic staff or your faculty or whatever you might be classified, almost everybody wants to have that recognition that their job is important. It's more than just a way of making a living. And many of us in the university system have had that opportunity. It's trust, it's respect, and it's freedom. It's empowerment. And we need to make sure that we empower all of our employees. During tough economic times, we often do the opposite. We tighten up, and we make the parameters very narrow for what employees are expected to do or allowed to do. That's exactly the wrong thing. If we want to grow, if we want to be entrepreneurial, we have to trust, we have to respect, and we have to empower employees. The only reason that I've been able to do so many things has been partnerships. I was allowed to go out and meet other people, to work within the community, to work with student groups, to find allies to do things. And I mentioned when I was interviewed in a newspaper that Lee Dreyfus was my first chancellor back in 1975. And Lee was one of those guys, he didn't want to know about the details, but he'd say, "That's great, Ron, go out and get her done." And it was implied you shouldn't hurt anybody in the process, but Lee was one of those can-do guys. I was fortunate to operate under the supervision of a lot of people who encouraged me to go beyond what the job description was. I didn't know there were limits, and the people I worked with didn't know there were limits, and that's the reason we were ever able to achieve things. So I would say respect, trust, and empower. This is a very humbling award. I thank everyone that nominated me and all of you for setting up an award like this. It's important to everyone. Thank you very much. It's an honor. It's humbling.
Well, as you know, I'm a program evaluator for a long time, so I am particularly excited to introduce an exemplary program. And the program that's being recognized today is the Registration and Records Office at UW-Stout. Over the past 3 years, the office has undergone a complete transformation to better respond to the changing needs of its students, its graduates, and the public, including, I'm told, earning 2 awards, Model of Efficiency Awards from University Business Magazine. They've improved the office in several areas, including, for example, hiring an additional full-time military education benefits coordinator to better serve the needs of our veterans. They've very much increased the timely awarding of their degrees. And importantly, they are speeding up and are becoming more efficient during the course registration process. For example, 3 years ago, UW-Stout was processing over 36,000 ad cards via in-person registration to allow more students to enroll. And I'm certainly old enough to remember what that in-person registration used to be like. But at Stout, this R&R office took advantage of a technology solution to eliminate those manual tasks. And this implementation has increased efficiency and reduced manual volume by about 75%. It's noteworthy, I believe, that the office's impact has stretched way beyond the campus boundaries and the boundaries of the state. Not long ago, this R&R office was contacted by a newly formed university in Azerbaijan about its system, and it has in turn implemented a new student information system modeled exactly after the system at UW-Stout. One of the persons who nominated this R&R office wrote to us and had this to say about what makes that office so special, and I quote here: Perhaps more than any other service-oriented unit on campus, registration and records serves a wide range of clientele with high expectations under challenging circumstances. They frequently interact with students and instructors under duress, from students frantic to enroll in courses needed to graduate, to instructors disgruntled about their assigned classrooms. What sets our current registration and records leaders and staff apart are their customer service orientation, innovative approach to problem solving, and proactive anticipation of needed improvements. Proactive anticipation. We on the committee like that a lot. I am told that their motto could be that R&R office gets the job done so that others on our campus have more time for their R&R. So it is with great pride that I present this year's Academic Staff Excellence Program Award to the Registration and Records Office at UW-Stout. It's represented today by Scott Carell, the Registrar, Joshua Lind and Jennifer Swoboda, who are the Associate and Assistant Registrars, respectively, and Listru Yates, who's the Business Automation Specialist who made a lot of this happen. Please join me in congratulating them.
They're coming up with me. And just so you know who they are, standing on my left side here is our Assistant Registrar, Jennifer Swoboda, and Listru Yates, and Joshua Lind. First of all, I would like to thank you for this award and for recognizing the outstanding work that we do. It is humbling and it is greatly appreciated. But one of the things I said I was going to do today, and he's sitting in the back of the room right there, and his name is Al Christ. There he is, waving his hand at me. Al was either fortunate enough or silly enough to hire me 21 years ago when I graduated from the Indiana University system. He told me one time, Scott, everything you touch turns to gold. But then because I was a 22-year-old whippersnapper, he did have to sit me down a few times and tell me, you have to understand the real world. Recently, I've been asked, what type of leadership books do I keep in my repertoire? I've never been a big fan of reading a book about how to be a manager or how to be a leader. But there is one book out there that I've read and reread and reread, and it's one that I wanted to share with you today because I think it's an important book. It's written by Marcus Buckingham. The title of it is First, Break All the Rules. Now, in a records office, you're saying, what? How can you break all the rules? It's subtitled, What the World's Greatest Managers Do Differently. And I'm not going to talk in detail about the study that was behind it and how that all shaped out, but really it talked about hiring for talent and training for skill. One of the things I've been able to do over the last 3 years at UW-Stout, through a series of retirements and expanding the office a little bit, is realign some of the job duties that best match the skill set of the individual doing the job. And I've also been afforded the opportunity to hire one of the greatest associate registrars known to man, and that's Josh Lind, and I got to hire talent. With this award that we want to thank you for, which couldn't have been possible without the senior leadership at Stout, Provost Bensey, Chancellor Sorensen, and the 8 other amazing team members in my office. This very generous gift of $5,000 is going to allow me to continue training for skill and improving operational efficiency. Thank you.
Thank you, Regent Rybar and members of your committee for selecting such a strong slate of award winners. We are now going to turn our attention, after being reminded of the important work being done by our staff and faculty members, to biennial budget development. I know you're all sitting on the edge of your chairs. As President Cross told us this morning, making certain that our financial situation is clear and understandable is a top priority, and it's our priority also. Here to take us through the development process for the 2015-17 biennial budget and laying the groundwork for the board decision-making at upcoming meetings is David Miller.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm only going to be here a second to introduce someone. We're going to start a brief, and I really mean that, a brief. It's been a long day. We don't want to tax your patience. Thank you for investing so much time today, but we can't have a meeting without talking about the budget. It's not possible. We are going to begin with financial aid because at the bedrock of everything we've talked about today is students. I got to do some guest teaching this week in the business school, and I was constantly asked about your customers. You have a variety of customers. Well, that's very true. But the foundational customer of this enterprise is always students. Always. Because every other customer is only an add-on to that base. So we have to protect our base, right? And so we're going to talk about affordability first. Because the first action the board has to take in the biennial budget cycle is this June, make a recommendation to the Higher Educational Aids Board on a request for financial aid for the Wisconsin WEG, Wisconsin Higher Education Grant, which is the staple of state funding for financial aid in Wisconsin. So if you remember the biennial budget puzzle from last time, we're going to talk about the financial aid piece today because that is the first step that you have to take. And in true interdisciplinary and interdepartmental collaboration, Bob Yokish from Academic Affairs is going to lead you through this discussion. He'll introduce the financial aid team, but he'll be leading us through the discussion. Bob, come on up. He's Senior Vice President Mark Nook, Special Assistant, and has led this work on financial aid. Thanks.
Well, I have to thank Susan Fisher right off the bat because I got here and looked for my reading glasses, and they weren't here, so I'm borrowing hers, so thank you. Good way to start. They look darling, I know. They match my outfit. As David said, my name is Bob Yokish, and I'm here today to talk to you about the need for additional funding. Oh, now I got to figure out let's get that going first. A need for additional funding for the Wisconsin Higher Educational Grant Program, or WEG. I'm with the Office of Academic and Student Affairs. I work with a small group of staff here at UW System Administration who have responsibility for financial aid, including Cody Lowe in the Budget Office, Kevin Welch in the Office of Policy Analysis and Research, and Chris Frederick in David Miller's office. In addition to our other responsibilities, we work with the financial aid offices across the UW system who award financial aid and provide counseling and support to students in helping provide the financial aid resources to enable students to attend college. I'm joined here, as I said, by Susan Fisher, Director of Financial Aid at UW-Madison, and thank you again. Susan is here to answer any questions you may have about financial aid, any other questions you may have about financial aid. The focus of the presentation, as I said, is on the Wisconsin Higher Education Grant, or WEG-UW program, which is a state need-based grant program that serves students in the University of Wisconsin system. WEG UW is located and managed in HEAB, the Higher Education Aids Board. There are similar programs in HEAB serving students in the other sectors: the Wisconsin Technical College System, Wisconsin Association of Independent Colleges and Universities, or WACU, and the tribal colleges. Before I get into the details of our funding needs for the WEG program, I want to provide you with a general overview of financial aid, how we award it, and what financial aid packages look like for our students in the University of Wisconsin system. As you can see from this slide on the sources of financial aid, the majority of student financial aid for Wisconsin resident undergraduates comes from the federal level. This would include both grants and loans. A smaller portion of aid comes from state funding, notably programs such as WEG, state funding for the Wisconsin Covenant, and the Academic Excellence Program. Institutional grants provide a smaller amount of financial aid, and other grants provided by private scholarships include the Wisconsin Covenant Foundation grants from Great Lakes Higher Education Corporation, Fund for Wisconsin College Scholars from the Mortgages, and other smaller private scholarships. There we go. If we look at how many of our students receive financial aid, the data shows that 78% of Wisconsin resident undergraduates receive financial aid. As far as the types of financial aid for Wisconsin resident undergraduates, loans represent 62% of financial aid, grants 37%, and work-study 1%. The two main need-based grant programs serving UW resident undergraduates are the federal Pell Program and the Wisconsin Higher Education Grants, or WEG. Pell provides $158.6 million in grants to almost 43,000 Wisconsin undergraduates. The average grant is about $3,600, and grants range from $555 to $5,550. WEG, in contrast, provides $58.3 million to 31,767 UW resident undergraduates, with an average award of $1,837 and a range of $764 to $2,324. The reason for the difference in total funding for these two programs is that Pell provides larger grants, as you can see, and Pell funds all eligible students. In regards to how students apply for financial aid, we use the federal methodology for our state financial aid program. The FAFSA is the free application for federal student aid, which is the standard process used to determine eligibility for federal financial aid programs. Most states and institutions, including Wisconsin and the UW system, also use this information to determine eligibility. Students and families complete this form and submit it to the Federal Department of Education. Using the information from the FAFSA, such as income, assets, number of children, and number of children in college, the student's expected family contribution, or EFC, is calculated. The EFC is the amount that, per the federal formula, a student is considered able to pay towards their college education in that year. The cost of attendance includes items such as tuition, fees, room, meals, books, and other estimated costs associated with college. The EFC is subtracted from the cost of attendance to determine the student's financial need, which can be filled with a variety of financial aid. With that as background, let's pull this all together to take a look at what financial aid packages look like at one of our UW system institutions. At UW Eau Claire for 2013-14, the cost of attendance is $18,980. If we subtract the student's EFC, we get student's need, which is the amount of aid a student is eligible for. For a zero EFC student, they will receive the maximum Pell of $56.45, the maximum WEG of $23.24, a Blue Gold grant, which is an institutional grant, along with the Covenant for those who applied for the program, and a small federal SEOG, or Supplemental Educational Opportunity Grant. I want to note that even with these grant programs and 2,000 in work study, a zero EFC student will be eligible for $5,100 in loans to cover their need. Not all students take out these loans. Some may decide to work more or find other resources to meet total needs. Now let's look at the financial aid package for a student with a 3,500 EFC. For a student with a 3,500 EFC, roughly equivalent to a $58,000 income for a family of 4, students receive lower awards for WEG and Pell and are eligible for almost $8,000 in loans. We highlight the WEG grant to show the important role these grants play in student affordability. It also shows that with student need where it is at, additional resources would be very helpful in making college more affordable and decreasing student debt. So what is happening with student need across the UW system? The number of students with need has been increasing in the UW system. One measure of this need is the increasing number of students with debt. As this table shows, the percentage of graduates with debt has increased from 65% of undergraduate resident degrees, 63, I can't read with your glasses, I'm sorry, to 73% in the past 10 years. As you saw from those student aid packages, our students with the most financial need are those with 0 EFC, equating with a family income of about $37,000 for a family of 4 with 1 in college. This slide shows that the number of 0 EFC students has increased dramatically from 2001, from 8,904 to 22,836 in 12-13. The biggest increase occurred from 2008-09 to 12-13. So what does this mean for WEG? As the number of students with financial need has increased, funding for WEG has stayed flat. As you can see, funding remains at $58.3 million for 5 years, including next year, 14-15. As I stated earlier, the number of students with need has increased, particularly since 2008-09, when the impact of the recession was showing up in students' EFCs. Not surprisingly, we were faced with a major problem in 2009-10 with the WEG program, as we were suddenly faced with a dramatic increase in the number of WEG-eligible students and not enough funding to provide needed awards. As a result, there was a dramatic increase in the wait list, with over 7,400 students unable to receive WEG awards. In order to address this issue, the financial aid directors and the staff here at UW System Administration looked at the WEG formula to provide more students with WEG awards. The WEG formula is used to determine the amount of awards provided to students at various EFCs. UWSA staff work with the financial aid directors to recommend a formula to the President, and the President's recommendation is then forwarded to the Higher Education Aids Board for approval. In 2010-11, the UW system recommended decreasing award amounts in order to provide more awards and address the wait list. Over the past 4 years, we decreased award amounts by 22% and increased the number of awards by more than 6,000. However, as you can see, we are still faced with a waiting list of over 5,000 students who are eligible for WEG but unable to receive awards because of the lack of funds. Moreover, award amounts are now lower than they were in 2009-10, and we would like to return to the 2009-10 award levels. As I said, we had a proportional decrease in awards across the board from 2009-10 to 2013-14. This slide shows the impact on awards as the maximum WEG awards decreased from 2,980 in 2009-10 to 2,324 in 2013-14, and the average WEG decreased from 2,161 to 1,837 in 12-13. One of the questions we are often asked is, what impact do WEG awards have on our students? If we go back to this slide on financial aid packages for UW-Eau Claire students, you can see that for students who are eligible for WEG but are waitlisted, that can mean an extra $2,300 a year in costs they will need to fund through some combination of work, loans, or other resources. Another measure of impact of these WEG awards is student retention. UWSA staff looked at retention rates for both WEG recipients and waitlisted students, and we found noticeably higher retention rates for WEG recipients, more than a 10% difference. I was asked to share with you options to consider as you develop the recommendation to HEAB for WEG funding for the 2015-17 biennial budget. My understanding is that you will consider the WEG recommendation to HEAB at your June meeting. The HEAB board will then review the recommendations at their August meeting. We list 3 options for your consideration, and we'd be glad to provide further information if you wish to consider other options. Option 1 would eliminate the WEG wait list, which is $5,096 in 12-13. The annual cost of addressing the wait list is $9.35 million annually, or $18.7 million over the biennium. Option 2 would increase WEG awards to 2009-10 levels. The average award would increase from 1837 to 2161, the average award in 2009-10. The annual cost would be $10.3 million, or $20.6 million over the biennium. Option 3 would do both. Eliminate the WEG waitlist and increase awards to the 2009-10 level. The annual cost is $21.3 million and $42.6 million over the biennium. As I said, these are just a few options for your consideration. We would be glad to provide more information on financial aid as you discuss the 2015-17 recommendation to HEAB. We would be glad to answer any questions you may have on financial aid at this time.
Mark.
Do you have an opinion between option 1 and option 2 as to which one is more likely to produce graduates as opposed to people who enroll?
I think our top priority would be to make sure that everybody gets a WEG award, so we would like to eliminate the wait list, the first one. I think that would be most likely to have an impact on retention and graduation.
Okay. So your answer was option 3.
Well, both of them would be the best, of course, but the option 3 does both eliminate the wait list and bring awards up to 2009-10 levels.
You have listed on page 4 the financial aid package, and you've got in there the covenant. Now, the covenant is going away. Does that change this presentation in 2 years?
The covenant actually will be here for another 7 years.
And that's because those are the people that are in the waiting list?
No.
I mean, are behind us, the cohorts behind us.
Right, right. So this year...
7 more years.
Yeah. This year's high school seniors are the last cohort, next fall's high school seniors are the last cohort that are eligible for covenant awards. So you're eligible for 4 years of covenant over 5 years, I believe that is. And so when those students reach freshman year, they're...
But in 2 years, you'll start to have people that don't receive it then, that are juniors today in high school.
No, they get it for the whole period. They get it for their entire 4 years. But
No, I'm just, the juniors, in 2 years, you'll have a new group come in here who won't get it.
Yes. Next year's juniors will not be eligible. That's right. That was after the signing period.
But does that, I mean, as to those people, wouldn't your presentation be different?
Well, I guess I'd point out, too, that, this is actually, I wish I could go back. I can't seem to find how to move this thing.
I'm sorry. David knows. He can do that for you.
Here. I guess. Yeah. When you look at here with the Wisconsin covenant, actually less than half, and at some institutions substantially less than half of our Wisconsin undergraduates are receiving the covenant, which is unfortunate. But the percentages aren't, I mean, that's an optimistic package.
Yes, it is. Yeah. So. But it'll make it worse.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think we were talking about this earlier. There aren't plans for filling that gap with the future cohorts yet. So obviously we'd like to do that in the future.
Expiring base in the current fiscal year then would be the 67.7 minus the 18.7. Is that right? In the program.
So with the first, so we have $58.3 million And if we added for option 1, for example, we'd add $9 million annually. That's an annual amount. The new annual base, ongoing annual, would be $67.7 million if we received, right, annual, right.
The early chart shows 76% of everything is coming from the Fed. Are you monitoring what's going on in Washington and the potential implications for us if the administration's plan to do pay for performance with regard to outcomes in this bucket?
You're talking about the idea that perhaps Pell money would be tied to performance of institutions. Maybe let somebody else talk about that one.
I've been told that it would take a federal law change to make that happen. Is that right?
Sorry. Regent Whitburn, I believe that is true. And yes, your original question was, do we monitor that? All the financial aid directors do work together to monitor these changes, but we've seen very little change in state policy in reaction to changes in federal funding. There doesn't seem to be a corollary that state funding ever changes in relationship to federal funding.
No, I understand, but if we would lose a significant amount of federal dollars, it would have a massive impact on the families of our students.
Right. And there would not be, I think it's safe to say that some of these alternatives are ambitious or historical trends. And we've talked about we chose to reduce the number of slides and reduce the number of options thrown at you today. But obviously there's a whole variety. One would be phasing in even these three in a first year, second year ramp up kind of way to have your ongoing base achieve these goals. Things like that would reduce the biennial cost. But it is, if we had a significant decrease in federal grants, it's unlikely that state funding could fill that gap, given historical trends of state funding.
Yeah. We are monitoring that in the federal government. I think, in fact, Chris is there right now, Chris Andrews is there right now. So that's being monitored. We don't know exactly where that's going to be. So.
No, I've talked to Chris about this. I guess one of the other questions for us to be paying attention to is if the feds took a greater proactive role, changed the distribution formulas, there would be winners and losers. And I think one of the things I assume we're looking at is would we fall in the winner side because we might because of our excellence. Or we might not. So the reason I raise it is that in this context, this is potentially could be big.
Absolutely. We've worked with the financial aid directors on the implications of this and had discussions with Chris Andrews and others. And we've also followed a number of the state proposed bills dealing with student loan issues and on the federal level. Susan Fisher testified at the recent legislative hearings, and there's been some interesting other federal proposals, too, that we've been following.
These funds, the wages for all students, are they paid for with our funds right now, the reserve funds and expenditures we have?
Regent Mueller, the first year of this biennium was just a dollar-for-dollar substitution of UW system program revenue for the state GPR funding in the first year only. The second year, meaning this coming FY15, GPR goes back at the 58.3 level. So it was just a
one time.
Thank you.
Well, I have a question. That was helpful, David. But between 9 and 11, am I reading this that on page 6, 0809, it says 970, and then it goes to 7443. Why is that in gray? I just don't understand.
Isn't that dramatic? Bob's going to put it back up there again.
All right, forgetting which one it was. Yeah.
Forward.
There we go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what Bob was explaining happened here is in that 1 year, at the same award level, the same maximum award level, the number on the wait list jumped that much in 1 year.
From 970 to 7.
Was the prior year, the 0809 wait list at that maximum award level, which was a startling thing to have happen, clearly due just to the economy.
Right.
And so they had to step in and request of HEAS to adjust the maximum down so that the number of students receiving awards would not plummet. But that's why you see this. One thing I don't like about this slide, is you put too many numbers on and you can't see anything. This is a very artificial step down. This is not a real decrease in the wait list because the average award went down, that wait listed fewer. So had the average award stayed up and the maximum award stayed up, then the blue would have been smaller and this would have been much larger. So it was a very quick.
The blue is the total amount of money spent.
No.
Blue is the awards that we gave.
Well, I meant, yeah. Yeah, the blue is.
Yes.
Not numbers of people.
It is numbers.
Okay, it is numbers.
Right. So they serve more people by lowering the amount they're providing you.
How much money was provided by the state then?
58.3 million.
The same through there.
Same throughout. It was just such a startling jump in the number.
So the state didn't respond to the need.
Some would argue this at the state, given the state finances, that they didn't cut.
No, I'm not trying to argue they should or shouldn't. They just didn't.
Correct. The gap was not filled with state funding. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. This will be really quick because President Cross said in his opening remarks a couple of things that I wanted to point out, except I have pretty pictures, so I will try not to be too redundant. This is just a very few slides merely about process. So what process are we going to use to create the annual and biennial budgets? Primarily what's different than the past. So there's three objectives for this part. Just to touch on the elements of an annual operating budget versus a biennial budget request. So the biennial budget is not really a budget at all. It's not something you can perform to. It is a block of large, high-level categorical funding, but it's not an operating budget. To talk about the changes in financial reporting in the review and approval of budgets and requests here at the board, and how fund balances will be categorized and reported. So just those three things quickly. I wanted to mention some ways in which we are increasing financial transparency in the UW system. Ray did touch on these. We are providing cash balances in the categorical format of the LAB audit, and I'm going to give you an example of that in a moment. We're also providing the Business and Finance Committee with quarterly management updates, performance to budget, of revenue and expenses, actuals to budget, and year-end projections. We'll have an expanded report like that in April. And then we'll also be reporting to the Business and Finance in April, and about that same time, beginning every year, on year-end balances projected. So we'll have, in April, we'll have the first 3 quarters under our belt. We'll use that data to produce a projection for the year-end balance, even though those won't be actuals. In annual budgets, you will be asked to adopt an annual operating budget in June for fiscal year 15 that has revenue and expenses. It's a defined fiscal year. We will also be measuring budget to actual. A biennial budget is a very different animal. It's entirely estimates. It's not an operating budget. It's not based on a fiscal year. It's based on 2 years that evolve and are continuously refined throughout the 2-year period. That's how you can get a lapse in the middle of the biennium. You can get re-estimates of cost and just get bills that you didn't expect. Your utilities could be lower than expected, and you have a windfall. So they're just estimates. You actually approved this June an annual operating budget, and you will have FY14 actuals and projections. So fairly real-time data on which you're then looking at the immediate next fiscal year, a pretty pure business model. But in a biennial budget, we have to, by law, send a request for biennial funding to the state in September, meaning you take it up at the end of August for fiscal years 16 and 17. But still, the only information you have available in actuals is FY14. So it's quite a projection, a lot of estimating in that. But then after that biennial budget is adopted the next year, and it's almost a full calendar year before that biennial budget is adopted, we turn that into the next 2 annual budgets that we're back to doing annual budgets that are real operational budgets in which we can measure budget to actuals, revenue to expenses each year. And then you start the cycle all over again. Something that President Cross also touched on that we're doing differently is historically, we're a state agency. We grew up as a state agency, and we do a lot of things like a state agency, although arguably we've grown way beyond that, and those models don't work so well anymore. Previously, you would have a budget that for fiscal year 15 was based on fiscal year 14's budget. So it would always be budget to budget to budget to budget. So you would start with your prior year budgeted base to build your next fiscal year budget. There's a lot missing in there that we now have to factor in. Namely, we have to project earlier 14 actuals, and then we have to do a carry forward projection. That latter box, the carry forward projection, is now required by law that the board look at its prior year carry forward in setting tuition for the next fiscal year. Obviously, you can't have audited numbers by the time you have to set tuition, so those will have to be based on projections of the current fiscal year and actuals for the prior fiscal year. And enrollment projections are key to building that budget as well. So let's look at carry forward just briefly and how you will receive this information. We talked last month about the Legislative Audit Bureau audit of carry forward. The Audit Bureau created categories that you see across the top of obligated, planned, designated, reserves, and undocumented funds. The Audit Bureau, though, only looked at tuition and extension fees, general operations, and federal indirect. There's some critical things missing from that that we've included in the Regent policy that you adopted in last fall, October, that Regent Whitburn asked me to comment on, and I will at the end of this. Auxiliaries, for example. The Audit Bureau didn't include auxiliaries because there is a sub-report on auxiliary balances that goes to the legislature already, but that only deals with segregated fees, which is only a subset of all auxiliaries. Our policy will examine all auxiliary operations and balances and will place those funds in the same categories. So I'm just using colleges here as an example for no other reason than it was first on the list. Other program revenue is also a group of business enterprises that every institution participates in, of which there are literally thousands. But each of those have balances, and we will also report those in the same way. So we will do an expanded version of the LAB methodology. And you'll have this for every institution. So you'll have something like that with totals for every institution, and then you will have from those institutions who are below the 10% targeted minimum or above the 15% targeted, not that that's a target, but it's a reporting threshold, specific reports for those institutions. Moving to the biennial budgets now, those were all about annual budgets. To the biennial budget, we talked last month about some of the challenges we're facing. We have unfunded obligations, but we'll call that the UW's structural deficit, meaning funding that costs for which we have no fixed revenue stream to fund, but we have to pay those bills somehow. We have coming fixed cost increases, what we commonly call cost to continue and debt service. We have to deal with this budget to actual and carry forward balances as we look at the biennial budget as well. We have to figure out what the tuition policy is going to be and what the tuition numbers are going to be. And Regent Bradley already mentioned compensation, which I think is the real 800-pound gorilla here, because you all know the numbers on compensation. And I sort of feel like we're the frog in the kettle on this issue. We have to address this and tackle it if we're going to maintain quality. Financial aid we just talked about, which goes directly to affordability and access, particularly of early enrolling students and retention. And finally, new initiatives that mesh with the state's priorities. So this is a very complex picture to try to roll together in a couple of months in a biennial budget. But we will know we have been successful if we have a plan for each of these components of the biennial budget. And if we bring you something that omits these, you should ask us, well, does this match with your list? And you may have things that I don't have on the list. So the preliminary estimate of funding obligations that we already know we have to cover, for which we have no current revenue stream, are the ongoing budget cut that was the base cut from this current biennium. Institutions have covered that this biennium on an institutional basis, meaning some may have not quite made cuts yet and spent some balances. Some may have made cuts because they didn't have balances to cover a year or two of this. That's been done institution by institution. And then we have the unfunded tuition share of compensation cost from this biennium that carries forward in an ongoing base as well, because we had the tuition freeze, but so we have no fixed revenue stream to cover that cost. For this biennium, that's also been covered in largely the same way on an institutional by institutional basis. If they've covered it out of one-time balances, then it clearly is an unfunded obligation right now. So we have to likely request compensation to be transferred. So this should not be new taxpayer dollars to the state, because those funds should be in the compensation reserve, and it's just a transfer, but we will probably have to ask for that. And the same with fringe benefit increases for the coming biennium. And finally, we like to always throw up these rules of thumb that can be handy for what a 1% pay plan costs, regardless of revenue source. That's what it costs. And that these numbers don't factor in utilities and debt service, which I mentioned earlier. So the point of this was just a nutshell about the process of what we're doing differently to get you more real-time information as we ask you to make some of these hard decisions by June and August, and give you a picture of what we're trying to accomplish in the biennial budget.
Question. next biennial budget will be introduced by the governor, whoever the governor is, February of next year. So we have to submit to DOA a biennial budget by when?
September 1st of this year.
September 1st.
Mhm.
Okay, and they will give us budget instructions. And when will they come?
Not soon enough. Sorry?
June.
Rita's saying last time it was June, so we need to be done by June, honestly. So
Sorry,
it's not.
would you turn your mic?
Yeah.
I think you just turned it on.
Outside. And then part of this, we've had no authority with regard to tuition adjustments in the current biennium. And so then we also have to wrestle with what tuition adjustments, if any, we want to make in and around that August timeline as well. Or not.
Or not. It's really, one reason I wanted to put the first part of this together is a number of people from a variety of sources have been asking, well, what do you predict tuition will be for the next 2 years in your biennial budget? It's very, very difficult. That's an annual budget actual exercise. The biennial budget process is largely about, it's a vehicle to request state funding for state-funded cost through the state budget process.
Okay, but you will have an operating budget for the first year of that way.
Yes.
And in that case, you will anticipate or predict what tuition is going to be as part of your revenues.
Well, this coming fiscal year, this June, when you adopt the FY15, tuition's already frozen.
Tuition, you know what tuition is?
Right.
That's the
For
second,
this fiscal
that's
year.
the second
That's the
year of the
second.
current of the current fiscal year.
Right.
And of course, the challenge is that it all has to tie out.
I guess, and I'm not with you totally that we can't do a 2-year budget.
Mm-hmm.
You can call it funds and you can call it the biennial request, but I'm not with you totally that we can't do a 2-year budget, year by year. Now, obviously, the further out you project, the more assumptions you make, but you could do a 2-year budget.
And it is in a projection sense, just that as you go, it evolves outside of your control.
And the more actual you have for input, the more your assumptions are.
Correct. And so generally, the tuition forecast in a biennial sense has been for the amount of state funding requested. There's generally a tuition share for all those funds has been built on what is the tuition share of the amount of state funding requested. So, feel free. Rita, of course, is here, and Steve is here for any other questions.
Critical to all of this will be the status of our carry forward. We're now in the 9th month of the fiscal year. And now when we meet next month, we'll be in the 10th.
Mm-hmm.
So will we have in our next meeting a pretty good feel with regard to a projection as to where we're going to be year end?
Yes. We're doing the predictive model based on the first 3 quarters for the April meeting, with the caveats that it's a projection. It will be pretty close. And we're going to communicate with the institutions so that it's not a system administration projection, but does this projection look right to you? So we're not just doing a computer model.
Do you have a feel for that now?
Yes.
Good answer.
Regent Whitburn asked earlier about the status of the policy that you adopted on balances. It has not been taken up formally by the legislature yet. However, we had a very, very productive meeting just 2 weeks ago with the co-chairs of the audit committee, their staff, and the Legislative Audit Bureau staff, in which we were able to do what we've wanted to do for a long time, is sit around the table and iron out technical definitions. Did you mean that by this? Did you think about this factor when you wrote that sentence? And got through all of that. So now we're working on a redraft of that. So we hope that the audit committee is able to take up their piece pretty quickly now. We have a committee meeting, the audit committee has a meeting next Wednesday on HRS, the audit there. I asked if they could take this balances policy up at that time, and they said really more members needed to get briefed about it, and there just wasn't time to get it done that quickly, but they understand that the board, the institutions want to get that solidified so that we can count on that is the policy. Discussions seem that we're going to be with the same percentages that I've described and that are in the policy. It's just been working through that with them.
I have one question. Could you put those issues back up? The unfunded prior service liability, where is that? Is that in your budget versus actual? And then my second question is, how do you account for the inevitable increase because of our growth versus the state? I think it's about $47 million total for you, isn't it?
The increases in what region?
The payments we've had to pay more each year, just like the hospital has.
Mm-hmm.
So where is it in the budget, and then how do you account for the fact that we're every year asked to pay a little more?
So it is in the annual operating budget. I have a table back there in my chair of the amounts per year that it's going up. It is not astronomical costs that are going up real quickly by the table. But it's just another shift in state cost, like changes in fringe benefit that we might have to pick up, or other costs that we have to factor in.
Isn't it around 40+ million?
Well, the total's more than that, but that's not the cost each year.
No, the payment
is in the 50s.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'll look at it.
50s. Yeah.
Last year was a big increase. I mean, significant.
It was in the high 50s.
It's in the 50s.
Total, well, that's a big payment.
It is. Well, that much is in our base right now. So, I mean, we're paying that. I'm talking about the amount more each year.
Well, it was $3-4 million last year, wasn't it?
Yes.
It did increase
Yes.
that much.
We're one of the few agencies that gets it that way.
Due to the volume of employees, of course. Yeah.
One factor.
But I thought some of it was supplemented through the fringe benefit supplementation process.
Well, this is prior service.
I know that's in that fringe benefit line.
The prior service is part of our fringe benefit costs.
Right.
So the state pays that just like they pay a part of our other fringe benefit costs, and it's GPR fee split for the part that is related to the state-funded employees. The ones on the auxiliaries and other things, of course, they have to fund that on their own. So we have seen an increase in cost. We do split the cost between tuition and state costs.
Thanks, Frida.
And for instance, the hospital, because it doesn't have GPR, pays it all.
But we do get some relief for our GPR employees.
Not at the hospital.
But not
Here
at the
we do.
hospital.
Here we do.
On the split.
That's it? Enlightening.
Well, I don't know about that. I wouldn't go that far. But.
May I just?
Yes, sir.
Maybe go back to the graph that shows the three input devices into the budget, the annual graph, the little boxes.
Yes.
I want to summarize from, if I may, just some simple. The only tool that was used as an input device in the past was the fiscal 14 budget. That was the only piece up there, other than enrollment, that fed into the budget. What we're adding is an actuals projected, because we won't have the actuals by the end of the year. So we have to project that. We won't have the actuals for the carry forward, which in essence is a balance sheet. And so we have to project that as well. But that allows you to have a better picture of what the budget should look like. That's the goal.
You're working with 9 or 10 months actual and a 3 or 2 month projection.
That's
so
correct.
You're working with pretty good information.
That was, I think, David's point. We're pretty close.
But a new timeline.
But a new
Mike,
timeline.
much tighter. Massive additional work on the campuses, CBOs.
Mm-hmm. Well, we hope that, I'm sorry, Jim.
No, you go first.
I was just going to add that David put this up here, and it's hard for you to see. I know the text should be larger. So the goal here is to break each institution down by the LAB category so you can see what's obligated, what's planned, what's designated. So part of the reason we don't have those numbers for you today is we want to work closely with the CBOs on each of the campus to make sure that those projections are reasonable. At this point, I think Rick's gone to, he was one of the anomalies. I think he ran his auxiliary account $75 million in the hole on our projections. Obviously, that's not true. I'm making that up, but he was one of the anomalies, and we got, whoa, what's going on here?
Watch him.
Maybe it's true. He's getting ready to retire, right? But those are the kinds of things we have to work out with the campuses in order to say these are reasonable projections.
But just to state the obvious, so you're going to receive these plans from the state, from each institution, that are going to be categorized as obligated, planned, and designated, or some in reserves. I don't see these being turned into us and yielding, oh, here's some money that you can use for your priorities. I don't see that happening.
I don't think anybody's anticipating it. I just think we want to get to a budget that is more reflective of actual and projections that are more reflective of historical actual.
Yes. David, can you go back to that input table with the boxes? The factors of an annual budget. I just wanted to point out, I hope I'm right about this, that we're not quite as at sea with the fiscal year 15 budget because we know two critical factors. We know the amount of GPR, because that was in the legislature's 13-15 biennial budget, and we know tuition because it's been frozen. So we do have two large categories to make that.
You don't know enrollments.
We don't know enrollments, but we can estimate enrollments. So I just wanted to make that point. We have many of the factors that we need to come up with a good estimate.
Which then makes FY16 much more difficult, and it lags. That's usually brought to the board in July of the odd-numbered years, waiting for the biennial budget to pass, so you know what those major factors are.
I'm sorry.
I just want to put this in some kind of a perspective because I'm still confused and will be until about 2018 when I'll be gone. Okay, so in prior years we've gone from budget to budget, cost to continue, all that other kind of stuff. Okay, so actual has played no role in what we asked for because the biennial budget is a request, not a budget, right?
I would agree with that.
Okay. So now we independently are doing a smart thing and saying, okay, well let's go from the budget to actually what we spent and incorporate that into what our request is for the next biennium. Is that what this is showing us? Okay. If we do that, and no other state agency does that, what does it get us in terms of what the administration is going to do when they put together the big budget?
All agencies do that.
My understanding was that all agencies didn't look at actual. They went from budget to budget.
No.
I mean,
We were the only agency that
you've got
didn't.
the Medicaid program. You're watching the caseload week to week. And if you get 3/4 into the fiscal year and you have a bump up in the caseload, then you come to the legislature and ask for a supplemental bill to back fund your requirements. So,
Did the university get to be the only state agency that didn't look at actual?
I don't know.
Okay.
I would tell you what I would think, if you look at this as what's a positive outcome that we're looking for in doing what we're doing. To me, that is that our budget and our requests become fairly routine. And then what we do is we go in with requests to fund other things we want to do. And if you take this, I don't know what you want to call it, this lack of understanding of how between us and whoever, and you make it an understanding. So when you present the next budget, well, it went up 2%, 3%. It's pretty acceptable. Now, here's the thing. Here's the things we want to fund to do more for our students and our campuses. That to me is where we'd like to get, and that budget is pretty much off the table once we have a budget that's more reflective and incorporates action.
Thank you for straightening that up.
But, Regent Higgins, we believe that other agencies, if they're within budget, they have a carry forward and transfer from June 30th to July 1st, just like we do. If they're within budget, they go back to the legislature if they are beyond budget for a supplement. But if they're not requesting new money, they're within budget, and they're within budget. Their fiscal year next budget starts with their prior year budget amount, not their actual. So,
if it's a continuing appropriation, if it's an annual appropriation, which many of them are, then that money lapses to the general fund.
Yeah.
I think there's a really important piece here in response to Regent Higgins. When you ask yourself the question, how did we accumulate the carry forward balances, the fund balances? How did we accumulate them? And they look much bigger than they really are when you see them in the aggregate. How do we accumulate that without some sense of why that happened? Not understanding the actuals is the key to that. And that carry forward exists off to the side. And I think the board needs to be aware of that fully, and I think that's one of the lessons we've learned from the last year.
And just to hit another nail on the head that we haven't said today is we want to do this in a way that does not incentivize end of fiscal year unnecessary spending. That's just really critical. That's why we got a continuing appropriation to begin with, so that we could carry forward funds and not have to spend down, or at least think we have to spend down at the end of the year.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, David. I will call now on Vice President Milner. Whoops, I forgot one. Are there any communications, petitions, or memorials from Regents? Okay, thank you. Now I will call on Vice President Milner to present the resolution to move into closed session.
I move that the Board of Regents move into closed session to consider a UW Parkside honorary degree nomination as permitted by 19.85 sub 1 sub F, to consider a Wisconsin salary adjustment as permitted by 19.851 sub C, to consider an amendment